across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and good morning to you. Thank you for tuning in. Do you know what? This morning, I think I've actually seen what hell's going to look like. I'm never going to sin again in my life because I have had a glimpse at the other side, and it's called Clapham train station during a tube strike. That, my friends, was the most ridiculous, convoluted, harrowing, traumatic commute I have ever done in my life. So do please excuse me if I look a bit like Rick Parfitt after suffering a sudden downfall of hail. But, you know, that's how you get dishevelled when Sadiq carnage reigns terror over London. Good morning to you as well. Happy Dystopian Tuesday. Right, OK. Got lots coming up for you today on the show. Some good, some bad. A lot of it just baffling, which seems to be the sort of main tenor of 2025. Now, if you want to join in the conversation, I'd love to hear from you. 03444991000 is the number to call. You can dial at any time, and the lovely Alicia will take your call and take a note of who you are, what it is you might like to say, and give you, I hope, a little bit of scrutinising just to make sure you're not too tonto. And then hopefully when we're doing the call segment, patch you through to the studio. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a little voice note on WhatsApp, a 1-minute wonder of your thoughts. 03444991000. Oh, by the way, if you do it sort of old school on the blower, it's your normal network rate. So that means it doesn't cost you anything. We're not charging you. We're not making money off your thoughts and feelings. Oh no, that's all for free. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send us a text message. If you're going to do that, you've got to write the word talk before you write your text. We're on X at talkTV. Okay, shall we just drill straight into the middle of the disaster that is Britain in 2025 with the wonderful help of Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online, the glorious, inimitable Mr. Brendan O'Neill. Good morning, Brendan.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
That is a loaded question this morning. I am alive. I am somehow here, and so that I will take as a win. Let's look at the top story, really, of today, which is a big reshuffle in the Labour government, trying to see off, I think, the threat of reform, or basically just get back on side of the general public and do what they should be doing, i.e. running the country effectively. And new Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has come out swinging. She's turned around and said that she's going to threaten countries who do not take back people who we wish to deport because they're here illegally or have broken the law with visa restrictions. And I must admit, Brendan, I read this and I thought to myself, hold on, we don't do that already? If we've got countries saying, like, no, we don't want our own people back who came to you illegally, why on earth are we saying, oh, but your people can still come here?
I keep having that experience where I read about the government promising to do something and I think, wait, aren't we doing that already? That's insane. It was the same with the idea that refugees here, once they get settled, are allowed to bring over all family members, and suddenly the government saying maybe we shouldn't do that. And I'm thinking, why were they ever doing that? That's psychotic. But yes, it's an obvious thing for the government to do. Whether this government will do it is another question, because you have to be really firm with these countries. If these countries are refusing to take back people who have broken the law either by coming to this country illegally or broken the law in this country, if they're refusing to take those people back, you have to be incredibly firm with them. You have to say, listen, we will punish you with these visa restrictions to begin with if you don't take back your criminal citizens. I'm not sure this government has got the wherewithal to be as firm as one needs to be, partly because they're in favour of a lot of immigration, and also they just don't have the the cojones to do what needs to be done in these situations.
I mean, to me as well, I look at what Donald Trump and ICE have been doing over in America, where he's war-gamed things such as tariffs to make sure countries do what he thinks they should be doing, particularly the countries that border him, saying you've got to effectively manage the drugs seeping in or the illegal migratory flows. He also went with a sort of, a massive electric chainsaw, a bit like Mile in Argentina, at US aid. And I don't understand why we don't do the same. As a post-Brexit nation, we can forge our own trade deals. We could level tariffs against various countries. But also, when you look at the amount of money, the three countries which are highlighted in the announcement about Shabana wanting to place visa curbs on those who aren't playing ball, the named countries are India, Nigeria and Pakistan. Now, I got wonderful Ted and Alicia to look this up for me this morning. When you look at how much money we're giving to these countries in aid, you just say take your people back or there are no more charity checks.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to play hardball. And, you know, Alex, I can't believe it's somehow become controversial to say that a democratic country like Britain should know who and what is coming into the country. That used to be par for the course of being a sovereign nation. You would have control of your borders. You would know what products are coming here. They could only come here with your permission. And you would know what people were coming here and what reason they were coming to the country for. For centuries, for decades, for the whole modern period, that was seen as a perfectly normal thing to expect a nation to do. Now it's somehow become controversial. Now you're far right if you say we need better border control. Now you're far right if you say a foreign criminal who comes to this country and rapes a woman should be instantly deported. Those were once seen as entirely moderate, normal opinions, and now they're seen as extreme. So this government has been part of that process of calling people far right, for calling for these ordinary measures to be enforced. So whether it can do it is, again, it's a huge question mark.
The latest of madness, because everything seems to be madness at the moment, that I've spotted today, is the head of the African Union are now calling for reparations from Britain for historic crimes. Here we go again. And I thought to myself, you know, this again, when Britain abolished the slave trade and fought the rest of the world to try and abolish it, it cost us 40% of our annual budget. It cost over 1,000 lives at sea. We emancipated 800,000 people, and we only paid off that debt in 2015. So you and I have essentially been paying for the abolition of slavery until 10 years ago. And then you look at the amount of foreign aid we're giving to African countries anyway, most of it which ends up buying private jets and Range Rovers and luxury trips to Dubai and things like that. And you think, what the cheek of you calling for reparations? We have done everything we can to support you. We try and prop up your economy. We've tried to show you how to manage ourselves. It turns out you're just pretty rubbish at running countries.
You know, I'm so sick of this politics of self-pity, this politics of grievance, where people are constantly replaying history and saying, well, you persecuted my ancestors 250 years ago, and therefore you should give me money now. It's pathetic. It's ridiculous. I might as well ask for reparations for what the British did in Ireland, 500 years ago, which impacted on my ancestors in the extreme west of Ireland. But I'm not going to do that, because I'm a grown-up and I recognize that I need to take responsibility for my own life. And, the fact of the matter is that no one in modern-day Britain is involved in that kind of slave trade. No one in modern-day Africa is being enslaved by a British person. That's the starting point of where we need to be. Slavery is history. It's over. Britain contributed far more to its abolition than any other country. And this idea that we should feel ashamed of our history, we're constantly being cajoled to feel ashamed of British history. I'm really sick and tired of that. There is so much in our history to be proud of. And one of the things to be most proud of is that we spearheaded the destruction of this slave trade. We should be thanked for that rather than being punished for things that we did beforehand.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? It's all of this stuff, it's all of this madness that I think is actually contributing to a communal mental health breakdown. The remarkable story yesterday of Terminal 4 at Heathrow Airport evacuated because of some sort of caustic chemical leak. 21 people reporting symptoms, people in hazmat suits. It didn't exist. It was mass hysteria. And then you look at this and you find out about the amount of people who are now not at work, sick days. Apparently everyone's having 2 weeks off due to poor health a year, when pre-pandemic it was 1 week. And 40% of people having time off is because of mental health. Yeah. And you think, well, it's no wonder everyone's going balmy, because we've been told that women have penises. We've been told that white people are evil. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's sort of, you can see why the social fabric's breaking down. Psychological fabric is breaking down.
Absolutely right. You know, the scaffolding of the old social system is falling apart. Communities are falling apart. There is this hyper individuation taking place where we're all supposed to just obsess about ourselves and our identities and where we are on the gender ruler and who we are as individuals. And that individuating politics of identity, I think, is driving people up the wall. They have very little sense of connection with others. They have very little sense of social responsibility often. Younger generations in particular are often encouraged to obsess over their own self-esteem, obsess over their own well-being. They have these things called self-care days, where they now take a day off work because they saw J.K. Rowling refer to some fat bloke in a bikini as a man rather than as a woman. And suddenly they need a self-care day. They need to, you know, take some time off and recuperate. We've encouraged people to think of themselves as weak, to think of themselves as constitutionally, morally weak, as fragile creatures, as people who could be erased by an offensive word or an offensive idea. And that is contributing to this culture of sickness, this culture of mental malaise. So we've brought this on ourselves, and fixing it is going to be a tough task, but we need to do it.
Oh, we do need to. I mean, ironically, some bosses have said, oh, this shift towards hybrid working has helped reduce sick days. About a third of organisations with people working from home report a decline in absences because they're not working. They're sitting at home in their slankets watching telly. That's the point. Oh, gosh. I mean, you look at the state of London, the state of the economy, and you think to yourself, we're going to hell in a handcart. But apparently the person who's going to save the day is Kemi Badenoch, because she said, I think rightly so, to the Labour Party, you're going to have to work with us to cut the welfare bill. Now, I guess this is based upon the fact that they tried to get the welfare bill through before. And actually, not long ago, the head of the IMF had praised the Labour government, saying, well, you know, we won't need to give Britain a bailout because they're now going to do this welfare cut, which, of course, then didn't get through. And so I think the sort of flip side narrative of that is if Labour cannot get cuts to welfare through Parliament, which they're going to need the votes of the Conservative Party and other parties to make that happen, I think we're going to get the giant charity cheque from Christine Lagarde.
You know, I think Kemi Badenoch is right that this is a cross-party situation now, because it's so serious what's going on with the welfare bill. And by the way, it's going to get worse. However much they chip away at it by, you know, cutting this and that here and there and saving a few million quid wherever they can, it's going to get worse, because we know that many of the millions of migrants who've come here over the past 7 or 8 years will shortly get indefinite leave to stay. That means that they will have access to all benefits in this country, not just to the NHS and GP services, but to housing benefit and unemployment benefit and other perks that were normally considered to be for British-born citizens or naturalised citizens. That's going to increase the costs of the welfare bill by billions of pounds. So it's like they're throwing deck chairs off the Titanic. That's what they're currently doing. We need a serious overhaul of welfare, the meaning of welfare. We need a discussion about what it really should be for, and we need to take away these perks we're giving people who don't actually deserve them.
Oh, absolutely. And we need to get people who are sitting at home thinking you can have a day off because you feel a little bit stressed and say, you ain't being paid for that, sunshine. I think that one of the problems is in this day and age, back in the day, there was a sort of societal taboo if you weren't in work. And plus you'd sit in your house and be watching Four Walls going slightly balmy. Whereas today, it's just sort of, oh, yeah, I'll show you how to sort of, you know, do as little work as possible, how to mess with the system. And you've got Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus and, you know, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok to keep you entertained, which is actually adding to the madness, no doubt. Talking about the madness, Greta Thunberg. I mean, what is this? She's claiming that her ridiculous, woke, short-fringe, lunatic flotilla on the way to a terrorist war zone, I just hope they blimmin' let her land, was hit by some sort of drone. And now the Tunisian authorities, apparently it was off the coast of Tunisia when this happened, are saying this didn't occur at all. She's claiming that it was officially attacked. Apparently, weren't they on their way back to Gaza because they'd stopped off to have a party in Ibiza? I look back at the era where world leaders held up and beatified this strange goblin child as an oracle, which to me looked mental then. And when you see her antics today, it's like, oh my gosh, they should hang their heads in shame.
It's ridiculous. The whole thing is so preposterous. You know, this is just sanctimony on the high seas. It's just virtue signaling on a boat. You know, these kind of preening half celebs from Europe going across to Gaza to make a point about themselves, not about what's happening in Gaza. This is self-promotion, not awareness raising. And, you know, the really sick thing about it is that in the time that Greta and her friends are on their stupid boats, Israel will have fed millions of people in Gaza. Through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it is handing out millions of meals every week. And Greta will be on her boat telling everyone who will listen that Israel is evil, Israel is starving people, she's the great white savior who must bring food to the starving people of Gaza. It's a lie. Israel is doing everything it can to feed people in Gaza, whereas these people on their boat are just making a spectacle of their own moral virtue. It's really grotesque.
I remember last time when she tried to get in, and the IDF intercepted him, like, come on, love, I don't think you should go there. They're probably going to, you know, slice your throat if you turn up on their beaches. And then he gave her a sandwich, and she sat there munching on a little sandwich going, I'm a hostage. Look, they've taken me hostage. It's like, what are you? Finally, there's a big announcement coming from the Labour Party, which is that Emily Thornberry is going to be standing in the competition to be deputy leader. I can't think of anybody that I dislike more right now. What are your thoughts on her?
What a disaster that would be. I'm sorry, but Emily Thornberry is just the biggest snob in British politics, yes, as far as I can tell. We all remember when she sneered at White Van Man, who had his flag flying out his front room window. We all remember that she went around dressed up as the EU flag because she was so depressed that the working classes of this country dare to vote to leave the European Union. She looks down her nose at ordinary people. She looks down her nose at flag wavers. She thinks people who voted leave have ruined this country. That's the last person Labour needs. If Labour really does want to reconnect with the working classes, and I'm not convinced it does or it can, it certainly won't be able to do it if she's got a leadership role. So no, absolutely, that would be terrible for Labour. It would be great, however, for reform.
Well, it would indeed. That woman, I don't know what it is about that woman. It's a tone of voice, it's her attitudes, it's the things that come out of the mouth. It's the fact she's Baroness Nugent with her empire of properties or whatever it is. She's patronising, cocky, arrogant, spiteful, high and mighty. I really do not have time and energy for that woman at all. So I say bring it on, because things couldn't get much worse than they are. I'd rather actually have the wolf in wolf's clothing than the opposite. Brilliant catching up with you, Brendan. You make me feel a little bit more sane, knowing that there's at least two of us in this world that looks at the insanity and goes, we're not going to take part in this. It gives me some form of reassurance. So thank you for joining me today. And thank you, viewers and listeners. When I said two of us in this world, I mean two of us on the programme at that moment in time, because you are also part of the sane crew, aren't you? Although they're testing it, they're pushing us to our limits, aren't they? They're trying to make us go postal, but we're not going to do it because we've got each other for a bit of, oh yeah, you guessed it, communal catharsis, which is why your free therapy is available if you call this number, 0344 499 1000. It's your normal network rate. You can also send a cry for help on WhatsApp using that number, or indeed leave me a voice note, cry for help, 0344 499 1000. If you'd rather text your concerns, 87222 is the number to use for that. Remember to write the word talk before you text. I'm going to take a little breather now, but don't go anywhere because there's more free therapy after this.
Keir Starmer's first tweet today was about the, not today, it was first tweet yesterday. Tens of millions of phones were successfully sounded across the country during today's emergency alert test. Did your phone go off, Jacob?
No, of course it didn't. I switched it off. It's all frightful nonsense. The problem with government warnings is that they'll be giving me a warning the moment that I'm standing in the sun and I should put sun cream on. They start well-intentioned and for major issues, and soon they warn you there'll be a gust of wind.
What a gloomy, ridiculous, negative prediction. I mean, that's why the country's in such a state, because people don't want to be ambitious, don't want to set a bold target and say, we're going to get this done. It's funny, isn't it? But the evidence shows Australia, they literally stopped the boats within just a matter of weeks when they had a pushback policy which was suitable.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now it turns out the African Union have decided it's high time that those evil colonial nations that enslaved their ancestors and wrecked their wonderful kingdoms need to pay reparations. That's right, the African Union has come and turned around and said Britain hasn't done enough to absolve itself of its moral responsibility for the dreadful things we once did in Africa. I used to live in Africa, right? I've lived in a lot of parts of Africa, been around Africa a lot. And let me explain something to the African Union. You don't need reparations, you just need countries that aren't riddled with corruption. You need leaders that don't pocket all of the foreign aid we give you to buy private jets. Oh, don't you worry about getting reparations from us. The amount of money we've given you for the past 50 years since you're independent more than actually outspends anything that you think you deserve. What's more, we abolished slavery. That's right, we did that. 40% of our budget was spent on that. 1,500 lives at sea. We were the first people and we stood against the whole world in trying to end that evil trade. In fact, we didn't pay off the debts for having ended that evil trade until 2015. So that means I have already paid to end slavery. Thank you very much. So don't you come after me and tell me that I should be paying more, because I've lived in Africa and I'll tell you something. You don't function very well, and that's not our fault. We left your countries 50 years ago. It's your problem if you can't seem to organise a government and run your own systems. You can't keep blaming us. Do you get me? Let's speak now to the brilliant Connor Tomlinson, writer at Courage Media, who I'm sure is probably going to vent even more than I have just done on this subject. So should we all be tripping over ourselves, self-flagellating, paying reparations? Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, who's from Djibouti. Oh, that's a very high-functioning country. I should have forgotten. That's like Singapore, isn't it, Djibouti? You've done really well at bringing that place kicking and screaming into the 21st century. He seems to think that it's all our fault still.
Yeah, well, I might as well pack up and go home, Alex. You basically summarised all of my views. By the way, Yusuf was endorsed by the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. Given the Islamic slave trade, I think the total Arab slave trade number was about 24 million Africans sold into slavery. And it's still going on today, castrating Africans and selling them in open-air slave markets in Libya. I think probably the Islamic Empire bears a lot more responsibility than the British Empire for the problems in Africa. By the way, Djibouti is on China's Belt and Road scheme, which itself is an imperial conquest project, buying up places in Africa, exporting Chinese labour out there so that the Africans themselves don't get any work while doing so, indebting the country, and its corrupt dictators pocket all the proceeds while the Chinese own all the infrastructure in their country, fostering dependence in African countries. So, yet again, not going to take advice from this guy on imperialism. But, of course, Alex, it doesn't stop the grift from continuing based on historical racial grievances. The Caribbean already tried this, arguing for £18 trillion, an absolutely absurd number, in slavery reparations quite some time ago. The same nations, by the way, again, like Barbados, who went from the Commonwealth, gained independence and immediately started sidling up to the Chinese. But I find this laughable because the idea that Britain and its empire didn't bring lots of benefits to Africa, while also buying the Africans that their fellow brothers and sisters were already selling into bondage. So yes, evil historical crime, but the idea that we didn't bring lots of benefits like, I don't know, written language and the wheel to parts of Africa where they weren't invented yet is absolutely laughable. And I think a bit more gratitude rather than demanding handouts is warranted here.
I tell you what's a really interesting thing, as somebody who has lived and worked for protracted periods of time in East Africa and West Africa, is most Africans, not most, but there's a significant chunk of them who kind of wish we'd never gone. There's a lot of Africans, and I met people like that in Antigua as well, who were like, do you know what, we like the British did us a lot of good. It's our African leaders that are the problem. And yet the UK media laps up this stuff. They seem to love it every time, you know, a former colony has a pop at us for, here we go, structural and systemic injustice. I mean, that's just the normal sort of word soup you get out of these people, isn't it? But what I think we need to be talking about instead, and I've said this for a long time, you were talking about the predatory relationship, the parasitic relationship almost of China in Africa and increasingly Russia. The Wagner mercenaries, now renamed the Africa Corps, are doing much the same in terms of seizing minerals, overthrowing regimes and offering security services in return for getting their hands on various resources. What we need to be doing as Brexit Britain is trading with these people properly and putting foreign direct investment in. Because we buy all of our tea from Kenya, and yet what happens is the sweepings from the Mombasa tea market go over to Poland, where they're then put in tea bags and then shipped to the UK. If we had a direct relationship and built that tea factory in Kenya, they'd have a load of grey-collar jobs.
Yeah, we've also got longer-standing historical ties, as you mentioned. Like, despite the corrupt leaders wanting to take kickbacks from the communist Chinese, Nigel Biggar, in his book Colonialism: A Moral Reckoning, where he actually contends with the moral cases against the British Empire in a pretty fair and even-handed manner, he cites a lot of people living in modern-day Zimbabwe, previously Rhodesia, that said, we actually wish that the Brits were still around and it was Rhodesia again, because as soon as you guys left, we collapsed into hyperinflation, famine, and became a failed state and contingent on either foreign investment or handouts from places like the United Nations. Nigel Biggar also, in his book and in his excellent piece in The Telegraph refuting this racial grievance grift today, cites a bunch of stats about the actual cost of abolishing the slave trade, by the way, and he cites a historian called David Eltis that reckons that it cost British taxpayers £250,000 per year, so that is about 10% of the foreign aid budget in today's spending for half a century. And in absolute terms, this is a direct quote, the British spent almost as much attempting to suppress the slave trade in the 47 years 1816 to 1862, as they received in profits over the same length of time leading up to 1807. So we more than paid our costs. We only recently apparently paid it off, but remember, debt has eclipsed GDP at this point, so technically we paid it off with debt, so we're still kind of paying into the same pot that paid off slavery reparations, and we have more than paid our moral debt. And what I think, Alex, is actually most beneficial for Africa, and you all know this because you spent quite a lot of time there, but I only know this listening to wonderful videos on the internet by Africans explaining their own culture, is that yes, lots of Africans will blame the corrupt leadership in their countries, but other Africans will say it's a problem culturally in Africa that has not been rectified and has actually been chased out when the British left, because they don't have concepts like planning for the future or even words for maintaining things before they break in certain African cultures and languages. And so by giving them lots of money, including reparations, by flagellating ourselves with this historical racial guilt, we actually absolve them of the necessary duty that they have to look inwards at their own culture, to examine the reasons why they haven't developed the sort of civilization the people that preach things like Black Panther say that they're capable of, and instead repair those things so that they might get up to the standards of a first world country.
There you go, Connor. I couldn't agree any more with what you have just said. The brilliant Connor Tomlinson, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I love Africa, and I've got a great many African friends, and I know Africans who are extremely, exceptionally intelligent, industrious, with integrity, with great vision for the future. I think there are some brilliant presidents out there in Africa. I think the concept of Umaganda in Rwanda is one we should nick. They go about once a month, last Saturday of every month. Everybody but everybody has to roll up their sleeves and clean graffiti, mow the grass verges, pick up litter, get trolleys out the ravine. Doesn't even matter if you're there on holiday. You got to do it. I think that's a great idea of a communal work ethic. But I'm a realist about Africa. I've lived there. I know how it functions, or dysfunctions, more to the point, and it isn't racist to say so. OK, right, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking about, well, the NHS crisis. There's been a league table now of hospitals, who's doing well, who's doing disastrously. That's coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I don't know if you've been to hospital or the doctor lately and had an eyes on what the standard of care is like. I had a brush with the NHS about a month ago, and wasn't terrible, to be honest. The service I got in the end was okay. I did have to wait about 7 hours while there was some sort of strange girl in a zombified state wandering around the hospital with bloody rags hanging off her. That was a bit weird. But it turns out that most of our hospitals, most of them, in fact 4 in 5 of our NHS trusts, are failing. There's been a league table put together of the best and worst performing hospital trusts in England. They've been named and shamed, and Wes Streeting says he's going to hold the bosses of those trusts to account. Well, it turns out that in these tables, 107 of England's 134 acute hospital trusts, 80%, are considered to be failing because they're off track on performance targets or running financial deficits. Let's speak to Jamie Jenkins. He is the former head of health analysis at the ONS. Jamie, for as long as I've had ears and eyes, people have moaned about NHS not working, waiting lists, and not enough beds, flu season, and all the rest of it. But I can't remember things being as bad as this. Am I just sort of looking back through rose-tinted glasses, or have things markedly slipped?
Yeah, good morning, Alex. So things have markedly slipped, in part because one of the health benefits over the last, say, 50 years is we are living longer. We've got a lot more people over the age of 75. We're at that point now where there's a lot of babies born after the Second World War. They're hitting the age of around 70, 75, going towards 80. And that's where you significantly see the ramping up of the needs of the care on the NHS. So pretty much where the NHS and this 80% of hospitals are failing, this is pretty much down to not just this government, but all the governments previously have not put in the kind of, I wouldn't say the money, there's plenty of money going in, but also, are there enough beds? They've cut the number of beds over the last kind of 20 or 30 years. So the money's probably adequate, but is it being used effectively? And that's where the mess that we're in. And then obviously, Alex, with the COVID pandemic, telling everybody to stay home, protect the NHS, led to that massive rise in waiting lists, and the government just cannot get them back down.
One assumes strikes are also a problem, having contributed to the waiting list as they started to at least drop slightly. Where are we in terms of the context of the developed world when it comes to our healthcare?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to kind of highlight there is, the NHS was formed in 1948, and no other country has chosen the model that we've got in the UK. So, if something works and it's world class, which is something that we've always told, you would copy it, and we don't see that. Just over the water, France, Germany, Netherlands, they have a different model, looking kind of social insurance kind of model. So, in terms of our survival rates for things like cancer, we are not at the top of the league in those. We're pretty poor. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. These league tables have been published. They don't make the waiting lists come down any faster. In fact, some of them, the differences can be explained by some areas are sicker, some areas have got older people. But ultimately, the government, the more stark thing, Alex, for me, isn't just these numbers today. If you just look at the 2040, we've got 6.5 million people today, 75 and over. That's going to rise to around 9 million people now by 2040. So that's a 37% increase. Where are the hospitals? If you think the NHS is in a mess today, it's going to be a lot worse in about 15 years' time, when I'm going to get a lot closer to needing to use the NHS yourself on a more regular basis.
So what is the solution to all of this? Should we by now, tell the unions to jog on and set up a European-style healthcare system? Because I remember when I was living in Brussels, I thought the healthcare over there was pretty exceptional. It seemed to work like clockwork. If you had a job, you had health insurance. If you didn't have a job, you had state-supported hospitals, and therefore were, your care was based upon welfare. And what I found was, they're not a sociable lot over in Brussels, particularly. They're a bit like sort of, Londoners. They don't talk to each other. But when I broke my ankle and was hobbling down the street, everyone wanted to come and have a chat with me, because the first thing they ask is, what have you done to your leg? Where did you go? How was the treatment? Small talk over in Belgium is basically, which hospital should I pick? And I think as a result, it's driving up standards over there. Could that model be replicated here?
Well, I think so. Keir Starmer and West Street have talked about reforming the NHS, but, one of the things, there is no national health service in the UK. Let's kind of cut that one out, because all these different trusts in England are run differently. You've got Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland where it's devolved, and the Labour Party had control of the NHS for over 25 years now in Wales, and they've had ample opportunity to reform Wales to see what works. So there's no national health service. Let's park that. So the important thing when you talk about reforming the NHS is, as soon as it's mentioned, none of the political parties then will go through with any radical change, because all the headlines, the media will say, you might introduce more privatisation, this isn't fair, should be free at the point of delivery. But I think some radical look at this needs to be done in terms of, if no other country's copying us and we've got worse outcomes, it's not a rocket scientist is needed there, Alex, to say, let's go and copy what somebody else is doing. It's common sense. But this government has clearly not got any common sense.
I've never understood either our mad approach to training and retaining doctors and nurses. This crazy idea that you've got to have a cap on the number of people who can take medical degrees, and then say we haven't got enough people, we're going to have to import them from the developing world. Well, I'm sorry to say, sometimes the standards of English are not befitting to someone in frontline medical care. Some of the things that seem to be still extant in the health service, and for that matter, something that's still extant, is NHS England. I thought they'd got rid of that thing.
Yeah, on the training point, you're spot on there, because I think personally it's immoral to have to take healthcare workers from other countries, because every country in the world needs healthcare workers. So if they're investing in their kind of population to develop new doctors, new nurses, and we just go and import them, forget the immigration point and the needs of our NHS. It's surely immoral to start taking other people from other countries when we're putting limits on the numbers in our country. And you're spot on there. And I think that's part of the issue. It's that planning that we just discussed at the start here. If we've been planning ahead, the population figures that the ONS produce are there, and they've been there for many, many decades, to see what are the demands the NHS will need. So this is complete failure of the government. Say this is going back 20, 30 years of government, because if we don't get those spades in the ground now for those numbers we talked about in 2040, it's going to be a lot worse. And I can see it, like on the government.
Oh, you little doomster. But no, my second point was also NHS England. Didn't the government announce that they were going to scrap that? And apparently someone told me that the cost of actually paying all these people redundancy money is so much that they've kind of decided they're not going to do it. Shh, don't tell anyone.
Yeah, well, scrapping these things, I think they are planning on doing that. But when you just scrap a body, another body just comes up anyway. I think the point of this is to get the government to have more day-to-day control over the NHS. And I suppose that's not ultimately a bad thing. If we hold the government to account on fixing these things, having more public sector workers kind of at arm's length from the government making decisions that could be poor is pretty poor overall anyway. So that's probably a good move, but you're right on that. You know, this is just a complete mess. The figures today are showing that, and we need change.
Jamie Jenkins, former head of health analysis there from the ONS, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. If you want to know the league tables of hospitals, so basically 76 out of 134 of acute hospital trusts are considered rubbish, not working properly, off-range, off-track in a range of domains, or in financial deficit. A further 31 are substantially off track. The worst of the worst of the worst is the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn, which also is part of the Countess of Chester the Countess of Chester NHS Trust, is one of the worst performing, which is where Lucy Letby happened to have worked. The best performing is Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, which I think was set up by Richard Desmond. Might have got that one, but I think it was. Also been there myself at one point. Had a contact lens issue. But again, you know, you sort of look at these things and you think they're specialist hospitals. They're based on private backing and philanthropy. That's probably why they're so good, because they're not an arm of the state. The state are terrible at running things. Why would you want them running healthcare? Let's speak now, shall we, to Davy, who is in Edinburgh. Good morning, Davy.
Morning, Alex. You were speaking earlier about the absenteeism from work regarding, mental health issues. We've got a generation of snowflakes, and it's all too easy now. You go into Google, and they can look up the symptoms, and they'll go to the doctor, and they'll present themselves with these symptoms. Virtually impossible for a doctor to say, actually, you're not suffering at all. The same thing with a different ailment. When I started work in the 60s, 70s, it was bad back was a complaint. And again, at that time, virtually impossible for a doctor to tell, actually, you've not got a bad back at all. And this is what we've got. We've got a PIP system. We've got God knows all what, but mental health. And I know people that have suffered from depression. Horrible, horrible thing. But the people that are claiming these benefits and taking time off work, they're doing an injustice to the people that actually suffer from these ailments.
But also, you know, I think when it comes to this, and I'm no psychological expert, but I think with a significant chunk of the mental health crisis, you've got to be cruel to be kind. Now, if you're someone who has proper chronic depression, if you are somebody who suffers from a diagnosable issue such as schizophrenia, bipolar, so on and so forth, that is a medical condition that warrants consideration. If you're somebody who's just a little bit down in the dumps, the best thing you can do, frankly, is roll your sleeves up and get on with things. Sitting at home by yourself, glued to the telly, not being productive, to me, just makes the situation worse. It exacerbates your sense of uselessness, of demoralisation. I mean, it sort of reminds me when I was a kid. If I was really poorly, my mum would be like, go into school, let me know if you're still poorly by break time, I'll come and pick you up. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, you'd go to school, and once you're with your mates and going to lessons, you're suddenly okay. And I think that's the thing. We're social animals. We're supposed to be productive. We're not supposed to be atomised and siloed, sitting at home, having our brains washed by wokery online, having our neurons reprogrammed because we're just watching lots and lots of little repetitive videos on TikTok and living in echo chambers. We're supposed to be out there looking at the real world.
I would like to get an insurance company and get their assessors to look at what would the odds be for all these people a certain age demographic to all have mental health issues at the same time. It would be billions to one. It would be billions to one, the chances of that happening.
Well,
here we are.
Davey, what I can say is you're definitely one of the sane ones. So thank you ever so much for calling up and sharing your thoughts. If you want to be like Davey and you want to talk to me, do register your interest now. 0344 499 1000. And Alicia will pick up the phone. And then when the time is now, we'll give you a call back at your normal network rate. I'm going to take a short break now, but when I come back, guess who's back in town? Guess who's just got back today? Yeah, Prince Harry. Can't wait. We're talking about that with Talk's royal correspondent Rupert Bell after this.
What a gloomy, ridiculous, negative prediction. I mean, that's why the country's in such a state, because people don't want to be ambitious, don't want to set a bold target and say we're going to get this done. It's funny, isn't it? But the evidence shows Australia, they literally stopped the boats within just a matter of weeks when they had a pushback policy which was suitable for them. And I think if we have a proper detention and deportation strategy, as we outlined a couple of weeks back, then that will be a huge deterrent.
The understanding of quite how rotten the state has become, the sclerotic nature of our civil service, the legislation that has hamstrung us, the international treaties that prevent us being a democratic nation, that these things need to be undone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. The troublesome prince is back. The prodigal son returns. Prince Harry is in London. Let's find out more by speaking to Talk's brilliant royal correspondent, Rupert Bell. Hello there, Rupert. He's back.
Yes, he's back. He always comes back at this time, mainly because of the Well Child Awards that he was at last night. And, of course, it coincides with the anniversary of the death of his grandmother. So there's a lot sort of emotion around this particular visit. But, of course, he's now back. It feels like a bit of a quasi-royal tour, because not only was he doing his thing yesterday, he's then going up to Nottingham and he's doing various engagements, I think, tomorrow, maybe around the Invictus Games, which, of course, come back to this country in Birmingham. So it is a little bit of a royal tour. There's obviously speculation that he might meet his father, who is rumoured to be flying back to London tomorrow, so maybe they can engineer some sort of meeting. And obviously he's talking about as he mentioned last night, his issues with his brother in a throwaway comment. So it feels a bit like there's a PR battle going on between the two brothers, because they both are out on the road and seeing, and William was with his wife yesterday, and William's going to be in East London, I think, today. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on at the moment. I don't know whether on purpose but from William's point of view, but definitely from Harry's point of view, he's trying to create some sort of feel-good factor, and that he's not the bête noire that most of the British public seem to paint him as being.
Where's the king flying back from? He's been in Scotland.
Yeah, he's in Scotland as he would normally be, and he's obviously going to be coming back. There's a state visit coming around with President Trump coming, but he is in Scotland, and I think he's due to be in Scotland mainly for the rest of the month, which is part of the sort of tradition of being up there. And actually, on the anniversary of his mother's death, it is quite traditional. His mother was always in Sandringham during the time of her father's death in February. So it's something that I think that as a bit of a tradition to be where they were, and obviously his mother was up in Scotland at the time. So it is traditional for the royal family to spend most of August and part of September up in Scotland. So that's where he is. But I think he's also flying back at times to continue his cancer treatment.
I don't understand. I mean, it seems to me, from the outside looking in, and I'm not much of a royal watcher, is why Charles doesn't just grab his two boys and go, I'm the king, you both have to sit in the same room at the same time and sort this out. But it seems to me what happens is it's sort of the royal households via all of their apparatchiks just communicate with each other, and they don't actually talk to one another as humans.
Well, that might, on the face of it, seem a sensible suggestion, but there's a complete breakdown of trust with Harry from William's perspective, because any time he said anything, he's gone and spilled the beans, and whether it be in a Netflix documentary or in Spare, and William just feels that his brother has let the side down, and until he shows a degree of contrition, William is not remotely interested, although Harry seems to think he's completely innocent in all this, and that his grievances are real. Now, of course, there's probably somewhere in the middle there is some common ground, but at the moment, between the brothers, don't hold your horses on a rapprochement. But I'm sure the king would dearly love to see a happy family, and maybe the starting point has to be for Harry to rekindle his relationship with father and build up some trust there, because what he doesn't want to see is every time he goes to see his father, next minute Harry's bleating to some favoured outlet about what's going on. And that's part of the problem from the royal family's perspective. They don't trust Harry, and they certainly don't trust his wife.
But he can't help himself, can he? I mean, why on earth? He goes to these awards and he's speaking to critically ill youngsters just ahead of the glittering ceremony. And he's speaking to one particular youngster, 17. And when Harry learned he had a younger brother, like you said, alluded to, made a comment, oh, does he drive you mad? And the kid replies, no, we get on fine. And then he found out that they went to the same school, said, well, that sometimes makes it more It's like, Harry, can you give it a rest? It's like he's obsessed with this conflict with his brother, rather than just see it as an opportunity to look good, go about, glad hand people, and look kindly in front of the kids. He has to get some little dig in there. He has to have that sense that, oh, people know how horrible my brother's been to me. People know how hard a time I've had. I'm always a victim. Isn't life so unfortunate? Can't he just put a sock in it for a second?
Well, that's what I'm saying. He can't. And then he puts in a throwaway line, but he's trying to make it seem siblings or whatever he said to these to this person yesterday. You know what he's getting at, but unfortunately, at times he doesn't read the room. He would be best to say, "Look, make the child the centre of attention." Well, what it's done is deflected and immediately drawn attention back to the situation between him and his elder brother. So it's all rather sad. It's tragic, really, in a sense that wish these two would be able to get together, because the royal family, when he was around, needed him, and he's good at this stuff in the main. And you can see that people seem quite pleased to see him yesterday. When he's on his own, doing what he used to do pretty well, Unfortunately, when he goes back to the California, he's a shadow of his former self. So maybe he's finding these 4 days a bit of light relief. But again, it does throw into spotlight, as we knew it would, the relationship with the rest of the family.
Now, you pointed out, of course, it is the state visit of Donald Trump next week. A big occasion indeed. Politically, what we know is Donald Trump isn't going to be invited to address the UK Parliament because they're not there. It's conference season, and I have a feeling that the timing of this was done quite deliberately to avoid any embarrassment of Labour backbenchers booing, hissing, jeering for, doing some sort of process which would just be really shameful. But he is going to get the full sort of glittering carriage treatment, isn't he, up and down the Mall?
Yeah, but he loves all that. That's his in his DNA, and that's why he does like the British pomp and circumstance, and we do it well. And it plays right into his hands. It is interesting from a sort of the royal family are used here. This is an example of the soft politics. You saw Keir Starmer when he went with his envelope, begging, here it is, here's a letter from the king. Oh, look at me, sort of handing, it seemed an unprecedented way to ask for a state visit. But of course, when you're dealing with President Trump, you have to do things slightly. The book is not there. The old book, it has to be ripped up. But he will be coming here. It is interesting that, from a Labour perspective, the sort of bigwigs are now humbly, they're almost prostrating themselves in front of him to seem that they are now the great Trump supporters, because they know they've got to keep him on side, because if you upset him, they never know what's going to happen. So at the moment, because he loves the royal family, Britain does have a trump card, to use the phrase, in terms of being able to keep him on side, because he is a royalist through and through.
It's fascinating stuff. Do we have any idea of what the agenda's going to look like?
I don't know, but I think it's, as you say, there's no parliamentary visit, but there's things going on at Windsor. The King and will be out in force. I'm sure there'll be a state dinner as well. So there will be plenty. And obviously, behind the scenes, we're hearing there will be some announcements. And of course, it will be designed to make, that President Trump is a good man and he's bringing trade to this country and all sorts of things. So I am sure there will be announcements that will be used to the advantage not only of Trump, but also of our current government.
Oh, do you know, I'm really looking forward to it. I've got a load of American mates coming over for it, and they're so excited, especially on the right wing of America. They love the royal family, and I think it's going to be a spectacular occasion. I can't wait. Rupert, thank you ever so much. Great to catch up with you. Let's do a few of your messages, shall we, before we go to adverts. For too many people, they treat sick leave as extra holiday, says Jeff in Aberdeenshire. Many people I've known had colds that peculiarly last exactly 5 days. My company had a policy of 10 sick days a year before disciplinary action. Funny how many people would have 2 weeks sick leave a year. It's interesting. If you say to people, we'll pay you not to work, they're going to do it, aren't they? That's the problem with the way welfare's gone in this country. Emily from Stoke says, I suffer from bad mental health and bad back pain, but I struggle to work every day. That's what you need to do. So many people are lazy and don't want to work, pretending they have something wrong with them and get benefits. It's very wrong. Emily, I'm sorry to hear that, that you suffer so, but well done for keeping your pecker up and getting on with getting on. We respect you. OK, taking a short break. Don't go anywhere. I'm back just after these ads.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. We've had a rip-roaring first hour, haven't we? Getting things off our chest. Oh, we've ranted about this call from the African Union for reparations. No more for you. You sort out your own countries first before you come to the waving the begging bowl at us for things that happened 500 years ago. We are talking about the fact that why aren't we, when it comes to Shabana Mahmood going, oh, well, if countries aren't taking back people who we deport because they're crims or broke in illegally, we might curb some of their visas. Why aren't we doing that already? What sort of a numbskull, soft touch, useless government do we have, or useless country that we are, that we let these countries just ride roughshod over us? We've also been talking about sick pay, Greta Thunberg's flotilla. Oh, that's a funny one, isn't it? I love it. That, to me, I actually want some sort of, you know, when people have like a flight tracker, when we had, you know, Dominic Raab on holiday, is he going to come and sort out Afghanistan, or Priti Patel flying back from something? I can't remember what that was. I actually just want a Greta tracker. You know, like the Santa sled that you get once a year. Where is he over the world now? I want to be watching that boat. And it is my desire that she gets to land that thing in Gaza, because that would give her a bit of a wake-up call, wouldn't it? As she hauls her sort of mad self onto the shores of Gaza and is greeted joyfully by all of those bloodthirsty terrorists, she might actually suddenly realise the world isn't quite as she thinks it is. So we're going to potentially dip back into that one as well. But for now, we've just got some polling. Apparently, the popular support for Reform UK has actually fallen following the party's conference over the weekend. It was the annual gathering in Birmingham on Friday and Saturday. They announced a number of policy details. But the event then was, of course, partially eclipsed by Starmer's reshuffle, which saw big changes to the top team, multiple sackings, promotions, the creation of a new super ministry. Of course, Rayner gone. But it seems to me, apparently according to this one poll anyway, that Starmer moving around the deck chairs on the sinking ship may have helped, because at the moment Reform are on 27%, minus 2%, and Labour are up 2% on 22%. Conservatives, Lib Dems stay the same, 17 and 15 respectively. The polling was carried out for Sky News and The Times by YouGov, but it still, of course, puts Nigel Farage on the top. Well, let's speak now to a pollster, Conservative peer Lord Robert Hayward. Great to have you back on, Lord Hayward.
Good morning.
Is this just one of those sort of fluctuations, do you think, that naturally happens in politics? There's a bit of a buzz, some tough talking, and people who are naturally Labour, always voted Labour, who might have given up, have actually said, maybe it's still worth another shot.
No, I think it's always cautious to take a view in relation to one particular opinion poll. The polls fluctuate, as you indicated just now, on a week-by-week basis. What I tend to look at, and I think most other people who spend their time, sadly, spending too much time looking at the opinion polls, is you look at trends over a period of weeks or months. And therefore, I don't think the one poll particularly indicates anything. It's well within margin of error and doesn't come as a great surprise in itself.
I mean, we've seen now poll after poll after poll after poll putting Reform quite far ahead of the competitors, you know, with Labour languishing around 21, 22%, sometimes lower, Conservatives stuck in the teens for a long time now. Do you think it's now set in stone that Reform are going to form the next government? Because, you know, increasingly you're hearing analysts and even Professor John Curtis turning around and going, well, it does actually look like it could be that way. And certainly I get a sense that just little indicators. So Heathrow Airport sponsoring the Reform conference, people are waking up and going, we're going to have to deal with these people because there's a good chance Farage could be Prime Minister.
Yeah, there's no question that everybody, whether they're in business or in the media or whatever it may be, are taking a keen interest in Reform, because there is an indication at the moment that they are quite clearly the most popular party. The two legacy parties, the Conservatives and Labour Party, are very low and showing no sign of improvement. Labour's been going down despite the poll today. And under those circumstances, if you are watching the world, wanting to report on the world, or wanting the right context, then you're going to go to the Reform Conference. There's no question about that. But I would remind you and everybody else that you only have to go back to 2021, where you had this huge Boris bounce as a result primarily of vaccines associated with COVID. He was sweeping everything before him and was leading in poll after poll after poll. And within a matter of months, he wasn't prime minister. Politics is a pretty brutal business, and what looks good one week can look pretty awful in a few months' time.
One thing that might be looking semi-good today for some people is the appointment of Shabana Mahmood as Home Secretary, because she does seem to have come out of the traps wanting to look like she's going to get things done. I suppose the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but she's turned around and said that she wants to she's planning visa curbs if countries won't take back migrants. And when I first read this story, she's basically singling out India, Pakistan, Nigeria. And I'm thinking, what if they're not taking back people who are criminals who we want to deport, or people who've come here illegally or overstayed their visas? Why haven't we cracked down on this sooner and said, you're not keeping up your end of the bargain, we're not going to take any more people from your country because we can't trust you to take them back if they do overstay?
Well, like you, I had a number of reactions when I saw this policy. Shabana Mahmood has been a member of the cabinet for a long time now. And it was only 2 weeks ago that Yvette Cooper was giving a new reset of what the policies in relation to immigration were going to be. So Yvette Cooper could have made that announcement when both of them were in cabinet together holding slightly different roles. So it seems a pretty odd announcement. There is one other element which is striking. I'm fascinated, and I don't know precisely where those three countries have come from, but the last time I looked at where the migrants who are coming across the channel are from, they aren't from those countries that you just identified. Sadly, they're from places like Iran, Iraq, Syria, and the Lebanon and Turkey. And therefore, well, it may be fine to say we're going to block visas from India or Nigeria, but they aren't the countries from which the vast majority, as I understand it, of illegal immigrants are coming.
I mean, there's been sort of announcements, haven't there? The suggestion that we might start using military bases to set up migration camps. Well, it wouldn't be camps, would it? It would be, I assume, old barracks. And again, you think, why aren't we I don't understand as a nation why we seem to be alone in the world in putting people in houses and hotels where the international protocol for an asylum seeker since time immemorial has been a tent.
Well, there was an almighty row about one of the sets of barracks that the last government used, and the announcement this week that we might possibly put illegal immigrants in barracks cited on that particular location outside Dover. But of course, the problem is, and I've said to you on this programme previously, that the Labour Party came into power with all sorts of ideas but no clear policy. We were going to smash the gangs, we're going to have one in, one out, and now we're going to have visa blocks. None of those have actually been put into operation in any substance, and therefore one's mind goes back, why on earth didn't the incoming government keep Rwanda as a policy and try and see if that would work? But at the moment, I'm afraid the current government is wafting around with one policy after another on immigration, which is precisely the reason that Reform are doing very well, because they are seen as strong on the issue of illegal immigration. And the polls that are undertaken on a regular basis, asking people what they consider to be the most important issue, normally people identify the economy. And they may well do in the run-up to the budget. But at the moment, for the first time in a decade, immigration is identified as the most important issue to the largest single group of the population. And the two reform support and immigration concerns go hand in hand.
Now, I'm looking at Kemi Badenoch right now, standing behind a podium, festooned with union flags, giving an address talking about UK's living standards are not an entitlement. And she's got a piece today in The Telegraph saying that the Labour Party are going to have to work with her to cut the welfare bill. I actually think this is a very sensible approach, because what she's saying to me rings true. I learnt about a month ago that the IMF had basically said, well, you know, Britain's not doing very well. France might just be ahead of you in the queue for the charity check, but you're not going to do very well at all. Oh, but it's OK. The government have got an idea for welfare reforms. That will keep the wolf from the door. But what we know is that legislation failed to go through Parliament because a lot of the Labour backbenchers said, you can't cut welfare. That's evil. That's terrible. That makes you right-wing. And so it seems to me if we are going to dodge having to get a handout and have our sort of credit rating completely junked, this has got to get through Parliament one way or another. And it seems to me the only way that that's going to be done is if the Labour Party go, right, instead of going after the votes of some of those backbenchers on our own side, we're going to have to borrow some votes from the Tories.
There's no question that sound money is going to be the message, and it was a message from the defeated French government that you've got to improve the stability of your overall economy. You touched on sickness figures just now and the rise of sickness. The level of sickness is quite strikingly worse, apparently, in the public sector than it is in the private sector, despite the fact that we spend all our time being told, oh, well, the public sector has all the best policies in relation to fill in the blank on the question of health. And but it doesn't solve the overall attitude, and it is an attitude, not a health issue when it comes to the public sector. And the same with wealth. The interesting thing about Kemi Badenoch's speech today, as well as saying work together because we have a problem as a nation, is that the element of polling where the Tories show up best, not dramatically best, but better than other aspects, is on the economy, the Tories' capacity to manage the economy. And therefore her speech this morning is not only saying we've got to tackle a problem, we've got to work together, but it's also conveying a message to the public at large. I'm talking on an issue where you more respect us than you do on some of the other subjects.
Stay where you are, Lord Hayward. I want to bring in one of our callers now who I think wants to talk about polling, which is Tarquin in London. Good morning, Tarquin.
Good morning, Alex. And sorry, I didn't quite get the name of your guest. Lord, who is it? Sorry?
Lord Hayward.
Lord Hayward. Good to meet you, sir. What it is, my view on this whole polling thing, why there's been a dip in the reform vote over the weekend, Alex, I don't know what your view is on, and Lordship there, is that I was nauseated by the arrival on the scene of a Tory shill, Nadine Dorries, the Boris Johnson shill, then moving straight in on her pawn up the board to say that Nigel and Boris should put their egos. Who the hell does this woman think she is? She's actually made me doubt my vote for the next reform. I'm now looking at Ben Habib in the Advanced UK.
Oh,
and I think Andrea
blimey. Don't say things like that to me. You're going to trigger me, Tarquin.
Lovely lady, but she shouldn't have sang Insomnia herself. I think Nigel's getting his feet under the table already. I think he needs to stop getting so bloody comfy and do some hard work and keep it serious. We've got a massive cost of living problem out here in the country. People are sleeping in streets, and Nigel thinks it's showbiz time.
Let's put this back to Lord Hayward, particularly in terms of whether this sort of fusion between the Conservative Party and Reform UK will cost both sides. Because it's interesting, Robert. Traditionally, because I was, once upon a time head of media for UKIP and Brexit Party, and what you tended to see was a strong Farage-led entity seemed to drag the Conservatives back over to the right wing, which is where I think a lot of the vote harvesting then came from. And then because it was always believed that Brexit Party or UKIP couldn't actually win, or in the case of the Brexit Party, they stood down candidates, those votes had nowhere to go. And I used to sort of, rather than this idea of splitting the vote, it was the sort of stage of polling, you know, 15, 16% not being able to really deliver under first past the post, that in some respects I thought started acting like a funnel for the Conservative Party and helped them get over the line and form majorities. But we're in a different situation now. We are in a situation where Reform has leapfrogged the Conservatives. A lot of people voting Reform, like Tarquin there, don't want to see Conservatives join the ranks of Reform. Other people say, blimey, they're going to need some experience. How do you look at this as a pollster?
Well, as I said earlier on, and I'd repeat it to Tarquin, be cautious about a one-off poll. Follow trends rather than particularly one-off polls. In relation to Nadine Dorries, Reform do have to be careful in terms of who they accept, and there is no question that Nadine Dorries is a Marmite personality, and Tarquin is a fair reflection of a pretty large group of people who view Nadine Dorries with serious concern and say, is Reform a credible party if they're willing to take this person, whoever that particular person is? And there's no question that Nadine Dorries falls into that category. In terms of Reform's overall support, yes, Reform's support did come heavily from Conservatives initially and still does. But the Reform Party has been very successful in siphoning off large numbers of former Labour voters in the North and the Midlands, and even in places like Scotland. Sorry, Tarquin?
The Red Wall, sir. The Red Wall.
Yes, precise. Absolutely. In the Red Wall, but I was going on to say even in Scotland and Wales as well. And they've been very successful in pulling that group in to their support. The other group, which is much more difficult to identify, but Reform do seem to have been successful in pulling in, is a fair number of people who've taken the view, oh, to hell with politics, we're just not going to vote. And it's the abstainers which Reform have also been successful in pulling in. The question obviously arises, will those abstainers, when it comes to a general election, break their habits and go back to vote?
Fine, I just want to ask you a final question, Lord Hayward, while we've got Tarquin on the line, because Tarquin was sort of alluding to the fact that there are some other sort of small fringe parties popping up on the right wing of politics. My experience is it's taken, well, I was going to say UKIP, it's not UKIP anymore, it's UKIP via the Brexit Party, now Reform UK, the best part of 30 years to get to a position where they might be able to win elections, to even get to a position where they got MPs in Parliament properly during an election campaign rather than defectors. And I think it takes a heck of a long time to turn the British people. I cannot see a situation, whichever, you know, big Silicon Valley person wants to inject a load of money or capital into a project. My personal view of the British people is it's unlikely we're going to have a sort of en marche movement in Britain. We're sort of quite traditional, and I think it's unlikely that any of these little entities that are popping up, I think most of them are projects that have replaced the old sort of midlife crisis of playing golf and getting a motorcycle. But I just think they're a waste of time. I don't, whatever their echo chamber on Twitter says, however many followers you might get on there, however many likes you get for your post, I think out there in the real world, 99.9% of people have never heard of Advance UK.
I think in broad principle, you're right that it is very difficult to get a movement, particularly with a first past the post system in the United Kingdom. But I said just now about the volatility of the electorate, people moving from different places to Reform. And there is the question of a Jeremy Corbyn party, and Greens seem to be siphoning off people from the Labour Party. At the moment, we've probably got the most volatile electorate that I have ever known in this country. Don't say never to anything, because there is a possibility that events will result in a sudden surge in a particular organisation.
But it seems to me
improbable.
Then, yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say though, it seems to me then that it's a lose-lose situation. Either these sort of strange little entities on the right wing aren't going to particularly cut through, but if they do, then you actually might end up with a situation where a vote isn't sort of in one place, it's scattered around, and we end up with more Labour.
Yes, I was just about to say that it's improbable that that will happen, but it is somewhat possible. But you're absolutely right that in a first-past-the-post system, a mass of small entities, whether it be on the left or the right, weakens that particular side when it comes to winning seats at a parliamentary election.
Yeah. There you are. That's straight from the... I was going to say the horse's mouth. I'm going to say the lordship's mouth, because that is what Tarquin addressed you as, and I like that. The lordship. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Lord Robert Hayward, and thank you for your call, Tarquin. Always good to have a little bit of a three-way conversation. It's nice, isn't it? Lively. OK, we're going to be taking a short break now, but if you want to make like Tarquin and share your thoughts, then now is the opportunity to do it, because it's call time. 0344 499 1000. It's your normal network rate. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, of course, or leave me a voice note. 87222 is the number to text like talk before your message. I am back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Best people.
Keir Starmer's first tweet today was about the, not today, it was first tweet yesterday. Tens of millions of phones were successfully sounded across the country during today's emergency alert test. Did your phone go off, Jacob?
No, of course it didn't. I switched it off. It's all frightful nonsense. The problem with government warnings is that they'll be giving me a warning a moment that I'm standing in the sun and I should put sun cream on. They start well-intentioned and for major issues, and soon they warn you there'll be a gust of wind.
What a gloomy, ridiculous, negative prediction. I mean, that's why the country's in such a state, because people don't want to be ambitious, don't want to set a bold target and say we're going to get this done. It's funny, isn't it? But the evidence shows Australia, they literally stopped the boats within just a matter of weeks when they had a pushback policy which was suitable for them. And I think if we have a proper detention and deportation strategy, as we outlined a couple of weeks back, then that will be a huge deterrent.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, right, before we do some calls, I'm just going to give you an update on there's been a bit of a grilling of the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, in the Select Committee in Parliament. He's been facing attacks from both the appearance of Bob Villan at Glastonbury and that performance being streamed live, that BBC Gaza documentary, How to Survive a War Zone, finding out that cute little kid who was narrating it, well, his dad's in Hamas, and also talking about scandals such as Greg Wallace and whether there are other people in the BBC who might be abusing their position. We're going to be mopping up all of that with one of my favourite human beings on the planet, Mr. Andrew Gold. That's at 12:45. Do stay tuned for Andrew. He is sensational. He used to work for the BBC. He is now running an absolutely incredible podcast called Heretics, which is on YouTube and on Spotify, and I highly recommend watching it. He's like some sort of brilliant, sort of sensible version of Louis Theroux. I've done his podcast twice, actually. It is very good. He is brilliant. The people he speaks to are brilliant. He's a proper journalist, which is probably why he left the BBC. So he is going to be talking to us about that at 12:45. Let's do some calls, shall we? And speak to Herbie, who is in Harrow. Hi there, Herbie.
Good morning, Alex. How are you this morning?
Well, I'm recovering, but I do know in about an hour and a half's time I've got to face that commute again, and believe you me, Kyrgyzstan ain't good today.
No, well, unfortunately, you know, the world's sort of like topsy-turvy at the moment by the sounds of it. Anyway, getting back to reform and wanted to perhaps join up with Boris, no way. Right. Reform has got the support it wants. At the conference, it was buzzing. I've never seen so many media coverage as what there was at this conference this particular time. They had a particular section, and I understand that BBC had 3 different posts, which is amazing. And, you know, the thing is, OK, if people keep coming over to reform from other parties, there may be a danger. We do not know whether they're going to be a bit of a bad influence to the party. But we need the experience, and let's hope that we get the right people. It's the only chance we've got, Alex, to change the country forever.
I must admit, you know, from someone on the outside looking in, when you have all these people going, reforms become establishment, they're not doing this, I'm like, OK, careful what you wish for, because it's taken about 30 years, I think, for a brand new voice. Look, whichever colour of rosette you wear, this is a fact. We have had a 2-party system for a very, very, very long time. Yep. And it's taken a very, very, very long time for Nigel Farage to be in a position where he can actually grab politics by the nettle. He has arguably been one of the most influential politicians of all time by standing up against the establishment. So all those people on the outside going, oh, he's become establishment, reform on burning crosses on people's front lawns, whatever the mad people on Twitter are saying. It's like, what are you doing? It's almost like you've got your own way now. You've got a position which is, once upon a time, even 5 years ago, people would have told you it's impossible, the polling we have today. You've kind of got what you've been waiting for all your lives, and now you want to go and destroy it for yourselves. It's balmy.
Oh, Alex, believe you me, look, the popularity of Nigel was unbelievable. I mean, he spoke to the people, he mixed with the people, and everything else. The man talks truth, he talks what the people want to hear, and I'm sure he will carry out the necessary reforms that are needed. But it will take time. It's not going to be done overnight.
This is the thing. You know, you can't. No one voting for a political party is going to look at every single policy and every single utterance and every single member and love all of it, because it's just not designed that way. And it's a bit like, you know, for all the people who voted Labour this last time around and now they've got a stonking majority and they've got a proper socialist government, instead of saying, oh, well, Labour's doing really well, we've had the Tories for 15 years, good, I'm going to vote Labour, instead go, they're not left-wing enough, I'm going to vote the Socialist Workers' Party. Well, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to get anywhere near the levers of power. So you're wasting your time. And I just kind of look at, you know, having been in politics for so long, knowing how the system works, I look at what's going on today, and when all these sort of people are sort of, I don't know, the people who purportedly want a right-wing radical change of government and are then moaning that reform aren't right-wing and radical enough, and Overton window this and remigration that, and I'm just like, what are you on about? You've drunk the Kool-Aid. You've gone weird.
Well, we want a party that's going to look after the country and do the needs for the people. That's what we want. We want policies that are going to work for the country as a whole, get this country sorted out, put it back on its feet, and work for the people of this country, not for the rest of the world. We need to look after ourselves, which I think Nigel's going to do. He's going to make this country great again, with all the help of the people. It's not going to be just Nigel, it's the people as well. They've all got to come together to work together to make it happen. That's the only way it's going to happen, Alex.
Herbie, it's great hearing your thoughts and feelings about Reform UK. Shall we speak now to Jordan, who is in Sussex? Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning, Alex. I wanted to talk about the hospital situation. 4 out of 5 hospitals failing.
Yeah, gosh, it's a really alarming number, isn't it?
It is alarming. It doesn't surprise me one iota, because my wife recently gave birth a couple of weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And basically, thank you very much. And basically, I mean, it was an awful, kind of absolutely horrendous treatment from the start, to be honest. She was originally had to call the midwife, so maternity triage. She went through a whole series of questions about, her birth, when she would be able to be go to hospital to, go into labour. And it was a 30-minute conversation about all these questions, and I kind of stepped in and said, "Are you happy with what the response you've been given?" Because they were trying to push her off to say, or to kind of say we've got too much work on, we've got a high workload. You need to make sure if your water's broken, etc. And then she was told, and she said they had broken, and they said, well, there's a risk of kind of bacteria, going in, and they said, oh well, you just hold on for a little bit longer. And we'll see if we can. And if you call back in about 20 minutes, so we called back, and then eventually I put my foot down and said this isn't really acceptable at all. And they eventually said, "I'll come in." So we got to the hospital. She was then literally wobbling like an elephant, over to the hospital. It turns out the side door to the hospital was closed. We had to go to A&E, get a nurse. We tried to call the maternity triage again, and the nurse said, "Oh, we can't come down. And I'd sound like they were having a cup of tea and a chinwag. And then literally eventually got upstairs to the maternity ward. And then I thought, oh, you've only was checked out speculum by the midwives and said, oh, you only dilated 2 centimetres. You have to go home, love.
It is a very strange thing to learn. It's because I hear from other people that maternity services in particular are not up to scratch in the UK, and I don't know what that's like. I'm not a mum myself, but the idea of that moment, most important moment in your life, but all the stress involved and the pain and the urgency, for people to just treat a sort of birthing mother lackadaisically like that is really alarming. But Jordan, you've got your baby's been born healthy, happy, 5 fingers, 5 toes, all good?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more, really, because, I mean, we went back after that. I'll just finish what I was saying. So we went back to hospital. She was then dilated 6 centimetres. That was fine. But then was kept in because she had a very complicated delivery. So she had a 3rd-degree tear, episiotomy. And then there was a risk of having a sepsis infection, so was kept in over 2 days. And during that time, she was given absolutely no help with breastfeeding. One, the nurses said, oh, love, you need to learn how to do it when you get home. I can't help you at all. This is a senior matron. And then, again, she was, bedbound for a couple of days at hospital, couldn't move, wasn't given a pan. So she ended up wetting her knickers. She asked for clean knickers. They said, oh, we'll bring them over. And then 8 hours later, when I got in, found out she still hadn't been given any.
Oh, Jordan, it sounds like you've really been through the mill. I hope things now are all about the bundle of joy, and rather than what it seems like is an extremely challenging experience with the NHS. The love of the whole audience to your newborn and to your wife, Jordan. Thank you ever so much for your call. Right, we're going to take a short break now. After the break, a story which I'm fascinated by, and it's what on earth happened at Heathrow? What on earth went on there? I don't know if you know, but all of Terminal 4 had to be evacuated yesterday. Hazmat suits, fire engines. But it wasn't really what it seemed to be. That's after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. Now, this story, I wasn't really aware of it yesterday as it was happening because I was at the wonderful James Whale's funeral. But I'm joined now by travel editor Lisa Minnow of The Sun because this incident at Heathrow Airport yesterday, well, it's baffling. Terminal 4 evacuated, and as far as I understand, people thought there was some sort of noxious chemical leak, and people, hazmat suits, I'm sick, my eyes. And it wasn't anything. What went on?
I mean, it is one of the oddest stories, isn't it? So what we had is just before 5 o'clock last night, there was an incident declared, a hazardous material possibly being found. At that point, the terminal was evacuated. So basically, the sort of land side, anyone who hadn't gone through to departures yet, they were all told that they had to leave the terminal. They closed the train station, which was already closed anyway because, of course, the tube strike. So there was actually only the Lizzie line that was going in at that time. That was closed as well. And then 3 hours later, they have come back and said, nothing found, no hazardous materials, everybody can come back in. Caused chaos for thousands of people who would have been heading out on quite a busy day. And obviously T4 itself, that's the issue, I think, is what you've got going on here is what people are saying at the time was an element of mass hysteria. So you've got people not understanding what's happening, being told that something's going on, hazmat suits, people coming in hazmat suits. And I think particularly with Terminal 4, there's an issue with that in that this is for a lot of our sort of other airlines. So this isn't UK Airlines, this is the likes of Qatar, they're the biggest in there, Chinese airlines, a lot of Middle Eastern airlines as well. Now you perhaps have people there who don't speak English. They're in a sort of heightened sense of sort of tension that you get when you go through an airport environment anyway, and then something like this happens. I think that could lead to this type of sort of mass hysteria incident.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. It sounds like the placebo effect, where, you know, someone's saying evacuate, and all of a sudden someone thinks, I am feeling a bit dizzy. Yeah. Oh, I have got the shakes. I think I do have a headache coming. So that was it. 21 people who ended up being treated. I heard that people have privacy screens put around them, but all of them discharged, nothing wrong with them. Do we have any idea of the origins of this non-existent hazardous material, where the report came from?
Absolutely none. And this is, I think, what feeds into this problem as well, is that if nobody knows what's happening, nobody understands what's going on, nobody knows the level of the threat, then of course you begin to imagine the worst. If you look at the geopolitical climate that we have at the moment, we've got unrest and we've got wars across the sort of Middle East, Ukraine. I think people have a much more heightened sense of danger than they have at other times. And when you put them into that sort of very kettled environment of an airport where everyone's a bit stressed, am I going to get my flight? Am I going to miss my connection? I think that heightens the anxiety even more and leads to this kind of incident.
I mean, are there fingers of blame to be pointed at Heathrow here, or did they do what was necessary given the circumstances?
I think they have to do what's necessary given the circumstances. You know, we have had, not in recent years, but we have had terrorist attacks at UK airports. We have got that heightened threat at the moment. So, of course, they are going to do everything by the book and make sure that everything is covered off. I mean, from what I've heard, they did look after people well. There were blankets given out to those who were waiting outside as the temperatures dropped. Water was given out as well. But obviously, people are still going to be very concerned. Am I going to get my flight? Am I going to be able to get home, or my connecting flight? In fact, actually, most flights, I think all flights did get off, but they were very severely delayed. And I think just hanging around outside an airport, not knowing what's going on for 3 hours would probably upset quite a few people, particularly the elderly or those who don't speak language.
Or if you've inhaled some particles of Novichok or something by accident. Really fascinating story. Lisa, thank you so much for coming down and being in the studio. Coming up, actually, from The Sun. Coming up to floor 17. It's great to have you here. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be discussing migration with the brilliant Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, as we learn that taxpayers have funded a £2.2 million refurbishment of military homes, which are exclusively housing Afghan migrants. We're going to be talking with him as well about this idea that there could be visa curbs against countries who won't take back migrants, as well as the fact that the Dam Busters base, there was a big petition against using that to house migrants, could actually be resurrected. That's coming up after this.
It's interesting that immigration has fallen a lot in the past couple of years. We had the so-called Boris wave, and it's now dropped off quite a lot. But the kind of as a topic in the media,
well, wasn't it about a year ago? Well, sorry, the last calendar year, wasn't it still in the sort of ballpark of 800,000?
I think my understanding is it's about halved from the levels that it previously was. I think it's certainly fair to say that, you know, depending on, you know, people will have different views on what the right level is.
Keir Starmer's first tweet today was about the, not today, it was first tweet yesterday. Tens of millions of phones were successfully sounded across the country during today's emergency alert test. Did your phone go off, Jacob?
No, of course it didn't. I switched it off. It's all frightful nonsense. The problem with government warnings is that they'll be giving me a warning a moment that I'm standing in the sun and I should put sun cream on. They start well-intentioned and for major issues, and soon they warn you there'll be a gust of wind.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. I am so lucky today. Everyone's coming into the studio. Robert Bates, you're here.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
I love it when I get human beings in here with me. It's really nice, because otherwise I've got to sort of squint like this into a camera, and it's just not as nice.
Well, that's it. We thought we'd come in and keep you sane, and rather than just sort of ranting on you.
That's not going to help, to be honest. So the moment of being sane has long passed, especially after my commute. Actually, well done for getting in here when you can't get anywhere in London.
I'm a trooper. I'm a trooper.
What did you do? Like, come on a magic carpet?
Just march from Westminster. One-man mission.
Oh, no, that's doable. That's a 45-minute, especially legs as long as yours. It's probably 25, isn't it? Probably like a stork. You probably just stepped over the River Thames to get here. Anyway, let's not talk about the length of your legs. Let's talk about how much money we're paying to put up Afghan migrants. Apparently, £2.3 million to refurbish military homes for these lucky devils. Clearly, these homes were fine for our veterans and our servicemen and women, but they weren't good enough for the precious Afghans who have all signed up to come here.
No, well, that's exactly it. And the number of complaints that you do see from former service personnel staying in this type of accommodation, and that's those, of course, that actually managed to get the accommodation. We've got thousands on the streets that are currently homeless. I think the whole Afghan resettlement schemes have been handled woefully from the very start. They're costing us thousands of pounds each individual per local authority every single year. And then, of course, we've had this secret scheme that has been snuck in. And I think what really happened was the political class got stuck in this sense of duty towards those that had served beside British soldiers. And of course, there's some element of responsibility, but I don't really think that warrants bringing a lot of them over in a very large number and resettling them in the UK. I think perhaps a more pragmatic and realistic thing to do would have been to resettle them in countries closer to where they're from, that are culturally and geographically more proximate to perhaps what they're used to. I think what we've really done is opened a floodgate here and started a precedent that is going to cost us a lot of money for a very long period of time.
And will be exploited. The idea that it's 23,000 people who all claim they worked with the British Army, and I'm like, did you? And then some of them are able to bring their family, numbering 100 people. Like, let's bring the entire village along, why don't we? We're taking people out of a terror-ridden war zone. If we're getting the wrong people and getting people who say they're one thing but they're not, that is a huge risk.
Exactly. We saw that with the list, of course. A lot of those people on the list were not actually those that had served alongside servicemen. I think really these are always the thin end of the wedge when it comes to resettlement schemes as well. You always get those that have perhaps got the most legitimate or the most clear-cut case, and then you end up with a sort of long entrail of family members, friends and acquaintances really coming along subsequently, and the vetting process that takes place further down the track is really where the questions need to be asked. Given the Home Office is very ineffectual at vetting people that are even coming on a legal visa via a normal sort of work or study route, you have to really question whether they've got the capabilities, the wherewithal or the pragmatism to actually properly assess the family members coming over of Afghans that have been resettled here as well. So I think there's a huge problem, and of course we are really only at the start of this process. I think we will continue to see the numbers go up and up and up of people that have been relocated across local authorities, many of whom are seeing huge pressures already on housing and public services for the foreseeable future, and this is what happens.
Where's the precedent for this. You know, we're told it's some sort of data leak, which is why we've got to do it. I don't really get it. But in the first Gulf War, we didn't go over and bomb the heck out of Iraq and then say to people, oh, well, you helped us, come and live over here. That didn't seem to happen from memory. Certainly in the Second World War, there was a load of Chinese people who came over to help remove bombs and things like that, and mortar from fields. They sort of combed through to make sure things weren't left behind. And when they said, oh, can we now stay? We said, no, you can't. Go home again. So I don't understand where the precedent is for this. I have a huge amount of sympathy if it's a woman who worked in government, or a translator, you know, someone who's a proper... Because before the Taliban came along, a number of years ago, Afghanistan was a sort of more sane country than it is now. So I have a huge amount of sympathy with those who helped British soldiers or wanted to work with the British and the Americans to stop tyranny and the Taliban taking over their country. But where it's got to now is beyond the, you know, sympathy and concern for those people we should have sympathy and concern for, but just madness.
And this is what happens whenever some government minister or some civil servant takes it upon themselves to devise a grand immigration route. A grand scheme always, as with anything in life, really opens up corruption, opens up mishandling, opens up problems that really weren't thought about at the time. I think it really was just the fact that we have, you know, in society over the last 10, 20 years become a lot softer and a lot more kind of nicey nice, human rightsy. And I think the whole conversation about Afghanistan has actually gone a bit off the rails ever since the sort of deportation plan was announced by Nigel Farage a couple of weeks ago. You know, this idea that individuals simply can't be returned because they'd be, you know, going back to a really, really despotic regime. Women and children, sending them back would be absolutely barbaric. Well, the Labour government have sent back in the last couple of quarters women and girls to Afghanistan. The previous Conservative government was sending back women and girls to Afghanistan. So
but
the whole
also,
conversation...
why is it our moral duty? If these countries have gone tonto, it's blimmin' awful. I get that, but I don't understand why we have to mop it up every time. Talking about going soft, when I read this sort of like, oh yeah, Shabana Mahmood's getting tough. She's going to crack down on countries who won't take back migrants by threatening visa curbs. I'm like, if you've got a bilateral agreement for we'll give you visas to come to this country, when people break those rules, why aren't we turning around already and saying, you've got too many people coming over here who overstay their welcome, high-risk country, we're not going to hand out those visas anymore until you take people back. Then you've got your sort of arch nemesis, Dr. Peter Walsh from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University, who says, you can very well imagine these countries would take a dim view of bargaining tactics that involve these kinds of threats, especially India. I'm like, take a dim view. Up yours.
I couldn't care less. I could not care less if they take
Do you think Donald Trump's sitting there going, oh, better not put tariffs against those people who are sort of flooding the country with fentanyl? They might take a dim view of me.
Exactly. We're sat in really a very strong position, surrounded by possible levers, and we're just refusing to pull any of them at this point. You know, it's not just the visa restrictions. It's, you know, let's cut some of those hundreds of millions of pounds worth of foreign aid that go to the likes of Pakistan and Nigeria every single year. Let's start taxing the remittances that are going back to those countries. Let's start putting in place trade sanctions as well. So there's a whole raft of measures that we can do, and for some reason we have not really adopted it in any way, shape or form. And the result is, of course, that we now have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people from some of these countries that have just overstayed visas, disappeared into the grey economy, and who we have no idea whether they have actually left the country or not. I think there's a lot more that we need to do bilaterally to really say to these countries, look, you have mucked us around for far too long. Start calling back your diaspora. Start saying to them, you know, we're now suffering in the country of origin because you have overstayed your visa. Please come back home, and start really piling on the pressure. I frankly think we're at a point where countries that have shown a sort of, nationalities that have shown a sort of systematic abuse of our visa system should really be put on a red list for a certain period of time. I really think that they've shown themselves not to be trustworthy in a large part. And of course people will say, oh, but you're punishing the whole to sort of punish, you're punishing the whole as a result of a few. But I really think we're at a point now where borders are designed to be discriminated against. You have a choice as to who you let in the country, and it is a bilateral tool. We need to start using it a lot more.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Now, this is one that is, you know, people have said, right, OK, it's time we use old military bases to hide these migrants. They can't be in houses. They can't be in hotels. That is ridiculous, which it is patently. But this one is a sort of controversial one. Look, my view is you just build a blimmin' girt detention centre. You take one of those safe store buildings which have sort of a labyrinthine system of rooms underground and just go, oh, there you go. Put some, you know, they've actually got air conditioning and loos and electricity in there. But, you know, the plan is to use old military bases, which actually isn't about sticking up tents and some barbed wire. It it is about giving, as we were discussing, sort of veterans and servicemen and women's houses. And a controversial one is RAF Scampton, which was at one point mooted to be turned into an asylum camp. There was a successful position. Those plans were shelved because, of course, it is the historic home of the dam busters. And there really is something that sticks in my craw about the idea that these brave men and women, the site from which they launched their brilliant assault that essentially played such a critical part in the Second World War to defend nationhood, to defend democracy, to defend freedom, the fact that that could end up being somewhere where a load of people have just broken into the country, kick about, there is something very
it's an awful
unsavoury
thought.
about it.
It feels like cultural desecration, deliberate cultural desecration. You look at the number of sort of RAF bases that perhaps don't have that pedigree, that perhaps don't have that national importance around the country that have closed in the last 20 years. You know, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other more suitable sites that actually, when you look at the cost of actually converting Scampton into something that would be usable for detaining asylum seekers as well, are far, far cheaper. And you're absolutely right. You know, it doesn't have to be an all singing or dancing detention facility. You look at what places like Greece have done, where they've built sort of 50,000 capacity detention centres for a couple of $100 million. There's a lot more cost cutting that we need to actually do because...
So yeah, talk to me about that, because I'm fascinated. The more I learn about what other countries in Europe do, who of course are also signatories of the ECHR. So here you go, Sir Keir Starmer, it can be done under international law, old mucker. When you look at what these other countries are doing, there's brilliant footage of migrant boats landing on beaches in Spain, and they're being undercover police and beachgoers who sort of tackle them to the ground. They get carted off the beach, and within two weeks they're back from whence they came. And I just think, why on earth are we like, oh, do you want this brand new built house, £300,000, underfloor heating, you know, induction hob?
It's the curse. It's the Anglo-Saxon curse. For some reason, we've just allowed a judiciary to become incredibly sort of nicey nice to these individuals. I think you are absolutely right. We have weirdly interpreted the ECHR and gold-plated it far more than we ever needed to, especially when you look at what other countries on the continent are getting away with. But I think that the point here when it comes to RAF Scampton is we don't have anywhere near enough detention facilities at the moment. We only have about 2,000 beds in our estate, which is absolutely crazy when you consider the numbers.
2,000?
2,200, I think it is, in detention facilities.
In detention centres, have we got that many coming over in the space of 2 days?
Exactly, in a couple of hours almost. Yeah. So this is how under-resourced our system has been for the last several years. And you think about the billions we spent on the hotels and the HMOs. That money would have been much better being directed on actually constructing these.
Why have people not built? You know, I remember during COVID, it was all about the Nightingale hospitals and how quickly those things can be created. You know, big building with sanitation, with camp beds to sort of treat multiple people all at once. And you think, if you could have planned that during that national emergency, why have these big detention facilities not been built? 50,000 in one, you say, in Greece? Yeah,
Greece, some of the Mediterranean countries have not been mucking around at all. I think we really have overinterpreted some of the obligations that we had under sort of Blairite acts that were passed on immigration rules and the sort of the rights that have to be bestowed to these individuals. And that's really why actually for so long we've struggled to actually have a conversation about detaining those that have come into the country illegally, because I think that's where the conversation's gone. No one wants these individuals in their community. No one wants them wandering around committing crime, you know, getting involved in the black economy. I think now we need to have a conversation about where these sites need to be, and you know, it might make some neighbourhoods uncomfortable, but if they are detained, then that sort of slightly reduces...
This is... I don't understand why they just get to wander about the place free as anything. It's mad to me. It's like you've broken into the country unlawfully, you're locked up in there. Sorry, lad. I don't know if you've been following the Labour deputy leadership runners and riders with enthusiasm. I thought you would. I thought that'd be right up your strata. Emily Thornberry has announced today, can't think of anyone I can't think of someone I dislike more. But I'm not a big fan of hers. The latest one is Lucy Powell, also somebody who I find it difficult to shower with praise. She served as leader of the House of Commons until Friday. She was sacked in his reshuffle. She's now going to throw her hat into the ring to be deputy leader. I can't see that working out well for Starmer. But the thing is, she was that one, wasn't she, on, was it Any Questions or something, who gave Tim Montgomery a massive roasting when he mentioned, and Tim's a nice, mild-mannered, sensible gentleman, mentioned the grooming gangs. Yeah, jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Any conversation about the crimes that are being committed against women and girls, or just the crimes that are being committed by foreign nationals or migrants in general, is something that's just been sort of defined by those on the left as an evil kind of sort of subterfuge, an evil attempt to kind of stir up hatred, when in reality we have a situation here where things are getting dramatically out of control. There is a vast overrepresentation of certain groups in crime statistics, and every single crime committed by a foreign national is directly downstream of a government policy decision to allow that individual into the country, or to allow them to wander around communities. So I don't think it's irrational at all to want to actually have a focus on this conversation. I'm very glad that the summer actually pretty much was defined by a conversation about that, because, you know, they've lost control of the narrative now, those on the left, the Lucy Powells of the world. They just simply can't really go back and push back on the irrefutable facts now that this is something that is a big, big crisis.
I know, they look more and more muppety by the moment. So good luck to you, Lucy. I'd wish you well, because I rather like having the wolf in wolf's clothing, like I said earlier. Problem with some of them on the Labour front bench is they're raving socialists, but, well, actually, no, none of them look sensible, actually. I was going to say some of them look sensible, but I actually can't think of an example to give you. Robert Bates, brilliant to have you here. Well done. Thank you so much for coming into the studio as well, especially when it's locked down in London because the transport networks are all shut. OK, right, one more hour to go, folks, so don't go anywhere. I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor of The Sun, right after this break. See you in a mo.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. I've had so much fun these last 2 hours. The stress of the morning is sort of slowly beginning to drift away. And then I look at the clock and I think, oh, well, that's back again in about 58 minutes, isn't it? When I try and get across London when there are no tubes working. I am telling you, it is not pretty out there at all. I mean, the hellscape that was Clapham Junction Station at around 9 o'clock this morning. Honestly, I felt like I was going to get trampled to death. Everyone jostling, elbowing, because basically it's only a few underground trains working. So I had to get a train outside of London, to get a train back into London, then get a train across London, all on the overground. It was convoluted, it was chaotic, it was commuter hell, it was carnage. Sadiq carnage, I tell you. And do you know what really sticks in my core? So here's the thing, right? In 2023, there was going to be a full tube strike, which if you're in London, you know how dreadful this is. But it was averted at the last minute because secretly Khan crumbled, and he gave the mutineers, if you will, the activists, what they wanted. He gave them a pay rise, and he kept secret how much that pay rise cost. It later emerged that in order to give TfL the money they demanded back then to stop them going on strike, it cost £30 million. Fair sum of money. Now, I don't know how much their pay demand would cost this time round, but assuming it might be in a similar ballpark, you'd be interested to know then that the £30 million that it might cost to give these people a pay rise is far eclipsed by the £100 million being hemorrhaged from TfL due to fare evasion. Right? I travel all the time on that underground, and I tell you what, same old characters push through those ticket barriers, swaggering. They know they get away with it. They're so cocky and arrogant with it. They'll just sort of like walk on through, boof, through the barriers like that. And there's a load of people in TfL high-vis jackets standing there. And I remember one time, it was at London Bridge Station, I went up to them and said, why did these three guys push through the ticket barriers? Can I do this? And no, madam, you've got to tap your card. And I said, well, why do they get away with it? And it was basically explained to me that they don't want to be, well, personal safety is one part, and I do have a great amount of sympathy with that, because you never know these days in London who's carrying a knife. But the biggest fear, I think, is that they don't want to be called a racist. They don't want to inflame community tensions. And I think if you actually crack down on all these people taking the mick and not paying their fares, you could probably have double the pay rise you're demanding. It really annoys me that, you know, this sort of woke, soft, leftist attitude to things like law and order, it costs all of us. It's cost the people who ain't going to get their pay rise. It's costing London's economy, which is basically not functioning today. It's costing me, and it's definitely costing my sanity. Anyway, got that off my chest. Let's talk now with Trevor Kavanagh, not about that, unless he wants to, but all the other things going on today in the news. Former political editor of The Sun, of course. Good afternoon, Trev. How are you doing?
Hi, Alex. I'm fine, thank you.
And safely ensconced somewhere that hasn't involved the underground, it seems. Good on you. Let's talk, first of all, about the deputy leadership contest of the Labour Party. So far, it seems to be all the women who are throwing their hat into the ring. I heard Harriet Harperson earlier on saying it's got to be a woman. It'd look terrible if you've got the Deputy Prime Minister's a man and the Prime Minister's a man. It must be a woman. Well, it looks like she's going to get her own way, because who have we got so far? Is it Emily Nugent, Lucy Powell, Belle Ribeiro, whatever her name is, can't remember, it's Addie or something. I mean, it's I don't think any of these... Oh, Bridget Phillipson, that's the other one. I guess that would be his pick, wouldn't it? Because at least she's in Cabinet and has kept her job.
Well, it's a horrific alternative, just because she's in Cabinet. I mean, you're looking at... Someone mentioned in one of the clips you just played that they are trying to keep the left of the party out of this contest. Well, it doesn't seem very much like they're succeeding on that front. And in any case, almost everybody in this party and in Parliament is on the left of the Labour Party anyway. And the Labour Party is on the left. So you're looking at some pretty extreme characters here. Bridget Phillipson is, I think, a Marxist. I think that half of those who are running for the job are at war with Keir Starmer personally and politically. I mean, this is a recipe for further civil war. We've got a Prime Minister who has declared war on his own party by insisting that they're going to, pretending to insist that they're going to deal with the boats, deal with welfare spending, and take up other issues which the rest of the world wants to see, but it's not going to see under this government.
No, I think you're right. And actually, I always think, I would rather have one of these mad screeching leftists visibly as deputy leader of the party, because you know what you're dealing with then, quite frankly. It's the ones who sort of look sensible and, pass as sort of normal centrist people who are actually raving Marxists underneath it that I find the most concerning. But it'll be interesting to see how this one pans out. It's not going to be easy for him, is it? I think this is going to be an ongoing headache. You can understand why at one point it was rumoured he wanted to scrap the position of deputy leader altogether.
Well, it is a nonsense position invented for some previous problem that doesn't exist anymore today. And I think that he's in a difficult position, whatever happens anyway. As I say, I think he is now at war visibly and obviously with his own party, and indeed his government is at war with the rest of Britain. The opinion polls tell you all that you need to know. Nigel Farage is eclipsing them in the opinion polls, and Labour has slumped to the point where it is just scrambling in any immediate election to survive. So this is panic stations in the Labour Party, and they're scrambling around trying to find a viable path out of the problems, and there isn't one for them.
No, indeed. It seems to me that, I mean, I'm amazed. People have been sort of bigging up Shabana Mahmood, saying, oh, she's brilliant, she's so right-wing, she's hardline, wait till she becomes Home Secretary, she's going to get tough. And the only thing that seems to have been announced by her so far is this idea of curbing visas for countries who won't take back migrants, which is basically what we should be doing anyway.
Well, exactly, and a lot more besides that, not least on the welfare front, where they're desperately now looking to save a few quid. Well, they could start by stopping putting up migrants in hotels for a start, and put them in camps instead. So, yes, look, her track record, when you look at it, academically brilliant, but, you know, I also noted that she has the warm endorsement of Michael Gove, which I think is the kiss of death in any circumstances. So, look, she is not a hardline right-wing Labour MP. She is someone who is ambitious and clever, and she's managed to get to a very good position very quickly. And she is the first Muslim Home Secretary. And it might be actually from that vantage point that she is, as Labour is seen as the only party that can reform the NHS, it might be that as a Muslim, she might be able to deal with this flood of migrants from Muslim lands.
You never know. I wouldn't count your chickens before they hatch, that's for sure. But it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Like you, I'm very pessimistic that the Labour Party have the guile or gumption or the will to actually tackle this problem. Let's have a listen now to Kemi Badenoch. She was making a speech this morning. She was talking about the fact that the Labour Party are going to have to work with the Conservatives and rely on Conservative votes if they're going to make cuts to welfare. This was her earlier.
Some people in government who must know that things need to change. You can picture their faces looking at the latest OBR figures, but the truth is they came into government with no real plans for how to save money, only how to spend it. That's why they are in trouble. And that is why today I am making the Prime Minister a serious offer, because the Conservative Party will always act in the national interest. If he is serious about cutting spending and really bringing down the welfare bill, we will help him. The last time he tried this in July, the Prime Minister was humiliated by his own backbenchers. He had to gut a bill just 90 minutes before MPs were due to vote on it.
I mean, I think that was quite a canny move there by Kemi Badenoch, and it's been suggested to me, I read a report somewhere, that the IMF has even warned the UK, if you don't cut welfare, we're going to have to come bail you out. And so I do think that there isn't a choice now for Starmer. If his backbenchers aren't going to support him in making these necessary cuts to essentially save the UK economy, he's probably going to have to do the unthinkable and go and ask for help from the opposition benches. Optically, this is going to be a disaster for Starmer, so I think that was a well-played move by Kemi.
Yes, I agree with you. I think it's a very shrewd move, and it's put him in an impossible position. He cannot possibly say, thank you, Kemi, do come and help me out because I'm in trouble with my own party, because it'd be even more hot water with his own party. So that isn't going to happen, but it does show him up as a failure to come up with hard policies that actually work. I mean, this is true about the IMF. And I'm not absolutely sure that the IMF has got enough money to bail out all the countries that are going to come along with their begging bowls over the coming weeks and months, because France is on the brink of similar activity. Their government has collapsed. They've got no money. They're up to their necks in welfare spending and national debt, just as we are. We're just a few inches behind them. But, you know, this is, oddly enough, it's the fond hope of those who are in despair about this government that they will have to go cap in hand to the IMF and therefore trigger a general election.
I know, it's sort of sad, isn't it, when you're wishing for economic doom just so you can have an election, but I find myself in that position. Talking about France, we are going to be discussing that at about 12:30 today, because they've got no Prime Minister anymore. Are there going to be further elections? And France is in a pretty bad state, although I read this morning, that I can't remember who it was from France, saying, well, we don't want to become Britain. I'm like, that says it all. But part of the reason it seems to me we're going to hell in a handcart is because we've become collectively mentally ill. You know, not only have we got all this DEI nonsense where we become soft touch on justice, telling people that women can have penises. People are miserable. People are depressed. People don't want to work. People have lost faith in their country, in themselves. And when you look at the data now on sick pay, which is at the highest level in 15 years, you scratch below the surface and you find out that 41% of employers are reporting long-term workplace absences and stress-related absences. This isn't just because there are a load of people who are suddenly twisting their ankles or catching a cold. It seems to me what's really smashing the economy right now are the amount of people who just don't want to work and get away with not working.
And people in politics encouraging them to do so. I mean, your beautiful phrase, the Sadiq carnage, which is crippling London right now. I mean, I live in the centre of London and the roads are all jam-packed with Uber drivers pressing their horns for the 5 minutes at a stretch. And this is symptomatic of what's wrong with Britain today. We are, in many ways, even France is now saying that we are the sick man of Europe again. And I'm old enough to remember when Margaret Thatcher took over and transformed us by some very bold and brave measures, economically, politically, and industrially, into the envy of the world. And I remember going to France during the period when Francois Mitterrand was president, and people were coming up to us, realized we were English and involved in some form of political enterprise, and they were asking people, can we have Margaret Thatcher when you finish with her? I mean, that's a huge tribute to someone who took bold and brave decisions and did act in the national interest.
Oh, no, indeed. Or if only we can sort of have some magical Margaret Thatcher ossuary that we can sort of, I don't know, do a voodoo dance around and bring her back to life, because my word, we need her. But what is the most laughable thing I've ever read today is Rachel Reeves is going to be launching a fresh attack on Nigel Farage's economic strategy, saying that it's a clown show. Rachel Reeves accusing someone else's economic strategy of being a clown show. I mean, they came and said, oh, well, there's this £20 billion black hole that the Conservative Party have left. And the Financial Times wrote to the Exchequer and said, can you qualify this? Is this true? And they said, no, we can't qualify it. The next thing, the 20 billion somehow become a 40 billion black hole because they went on a spending spree and let mad Red Ed Zero go and sort of set up whatever he wants in his energy department and paying out these massive pay rises to everybody in a union. And now it just seems we're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into debt because this woman shouldn't even be trusted with a play school abacus.
Absolutely, and returning to your point about nervous breakdowns, I think she's already had one in public in the House of Commons, and that's because she sees that there's absolutely no way out of the ghastly black hole that she has dug for herself. I mean, we are going to have tax rises because with Torsten Bell pulling all the strings now in both the Treasury and in the government generally, we're going to have a wealth tax, without doubt. We're going to find all sorts of very unpleasant taxes. I don't think anyone in the current Labour Party, especially on the Treasury side, has ever heard of the Laffer curve. I mean, to be honest, nor had Jeremy Hunt when he was Chancellor. He was baffled by the phrase. But the thing is about tax. I think that the public is prepared to accept tax increases if the money is spent properly in the national interest. And what we've learned over the last 14 years, but especially in the last 14 months, is that it's being squandered in vast quantities on nice-to-have indulgences, which we are having to pay for. And that's why we're squeezed in this cost of living crisis.
Or perhaps not nice to have indulgences, because I think if we suddenly had a Labour Party who visibly said, right, all of these people have broken in illegally, they're gone. Deportation flights every single day, they're out. If anyone turns up in a boat, they're being whacked into a detention centre, and then turned around and said, look, sorry lads, but we're going to have to put your taxes up by 1 or 2% because the economy's in a mess, I think people go, OK, right, going to have to suffer this. But it's the dichotomy of making us dig deeper, calling us far-right thugs, and then letting any old Tom, Dick and Harry from Lord knows where roll into town and get a new house. That is what's really angering people.
No, absolutely true. And what I've learned over many years in politics is that subsidies always go wrong. They are always a bad thing because people don't look upon them as they do in the first moments that any money arrives in their lap as a bonus or a pleasure. They see it within days as a right. And when someone wakes up to the fact that we can't afford it and takes it away, there is a huge demonstration. And as we've discovered in the Labour's attempts to reform welfare or cut some welfare spending, they won't allow it. And, you know, we've learned the lesson from, for instance, the triple lock on pensions. We've learned from the winter fuel allowance, which was a bribe and a deliberate hook on which to hang the Tories, dished out by Gordon Brown as his personal Christmas present to needy pensioners, including people like you and me who don't need the winter fuel allowance, but the rest of the public has to pay the multi-millions or billions that has to go towards paying for it. So, you know, you're always hooked and badly affected by any subsidy. This is the welfare state writ large.
Indeed it is, but none of us are feeling very well, it turns out. Trevor, thank you ever so much. It's always brilliant catching up with you. The excellent Trevor Kavanagh. Right, now have you been looking at the latest in America, this revelation that there are always various notes and letters and things like that to and from Jeffrey Epstein? That's now been released for the very first time, as well as a sort of weird, creepy drawing, allegedly doodled by Donald Trump, although he vehemently denies it was him. Bill Clinton's birthday letter to Jeffrey Epstein, praising his childlike curiosity, and then at the thick of it all as well, right in the middle of it, is old Mandy. Peter Mandelson saying, you know, basically saying that Epstein's his best mate. Oh, things are hotting up. We're going to delve into that one after the break.
and they were going to have to do a reshuffle anyway, I think the calculus changed and it was a bit of a, well, since we have to do a reshuffle and we had this plan for one, I think really it is a bit of a case of go big or go home. They decided, you know, the risk of doing it was lower than the risk of not doing it.
And it also took
away some of the headlines, I suppose, from the the specifics of Angela Rayner. Not that they disappeared, but it meant that the big headlines by the 6 o'clock news was the reshuffle rather than the resignation.
It's interesting that immigration has fallen a lot in the past couple of years. We had the so-called Boris wave, and it's now dropped off quite a lot. But the kind of as a topic in the media,
well, wasn't it about a year ago? It was sort of the last calendar year, wasn't it? Still in the sort of ballpark of 800,000.
I think my understanding is it's about halved from the levels that it previously was. And I think it's certainly fair to say that depending on people will have different views on what the right level is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, it's a story that gripped the world, and it's a story that's still very much gripping America, which is Jeffrey Epstein and the list. Is there one? Isn't there one? Apparently Ghislaine Maxwell has turned around and now denies that there's any sort of list. I do wonder whether she's just trying to curry favour with the president in order that she might get a pardon at some point. Maybe there was never a list. I kind of think there probably was a list, because a sort of mad scheming narcissist like Epstein probably would have kept a list. Doesn't mean that Trump is on that list. Who is on the list? I don't know. No one's seen the list. But other things have been seen. For example, Bill Clinton's letter to Jeffrey Epstein, in which he praised the billionaire paedophile's childlike curiosity, along with a drawing of Epstein approaching young girls. These are images released from his 50th birthday book. I mean, it's just it's astonishing, the bits that are coming out on this now. Let's speak to Laurie Laird, a US political commentator. She's brilliant and she joins us now. Good afternoon, Laurie.
Hello, Alex. Nice to see you.
Give me the latest on this, because, American media, Wall Street Journal, who, of course, they've got a branch in our building here, they are doing great things about keeping the foot on the gas when it comes to this story, but the UK press not so over it, I'd say. So can you give us the latest of what is going on?
It's kind of hard to get your arms around this story. And I think part of that is because of miscommunication from the administration itself. Remember Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who was very close to Donald Trump, at one point said, yes, there's a list on my desk and I just have to go through it. Then a couple of months later, there's no list. What are you talking about? So I think the fact that the administration hasn't got its story entirely straight is feeding some of the speculation around this story. Look, Donald Trump says that he fell out with Jeffrey Epstein sometime early in the 2000s, 2004, 2005. There isn't any evidence to suggest that they were friends after that. We're looking at some footage of the two men together, but we've not seen the two of them together in footage or still photographs since that point. Frankly, if the two of them hadn't known each other at some point in the circles that they traveled in New York, that would have been more remarkable than the fact that they actually knew each other. It's hard. Donald Trump doesn't always speak the truth, but there isn't any evidence, at least that we've seen, that Donald Trump was doing something untoward. I think, he hasn't been to the island where a lot of these Epstein's misdeeds happened. So I think the Trump administration is making this more difficult for themselves than they need to.
What do we know about whether this is true or not? This letter allegedly written by Trump, which says, a pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret. I mean, he's saying, no, definitely not me. Other people have looked at it and said, that ain't his handwriting, looking at his presidential signature now. But other people who know the journalist say, no, Wall Street Journal banged to rights on this one.
I suspect that this would have, for the Wall Street Journal to go with this, I suspect it would have been so heavily lawyered. I mean, remember Murdoch, the head of News Corp, and Trump were great mates in the first administration. So, it may be that Trump authored this. A lot of other prominent, powerful men also contributed to this birthday book. And if you'll allow me to digress just for a moment, I can't, for the life of me, Alex, figure out how Jeff Epstein was so friendly with all of these powerful men. Jeff Epstein's first job was a supply teacher in a secondary school. How he made the leap from supply teaching to leading financier, able to buy his own island, friends with Peter Mandelson and Henry Kissinger and Bill Clinton. I'd love to know more about how he made that leap, but I think some of those men that we just mentioned might be closer to Epstein than Donald Trump seemed to be.
Yeah, I've heard some theories on how he might have made that leap, but they might be a little bit too tinfoil hat and conspiracy theory for 1228.
That one for the pub.
That's one for the pub, exactly. But let's take the British angle now on all of this, because Prince Andrew doesn't, stuff written by him isn't in this sort of latest disclosure, but my understanding is there have been disclosures from a particular young woman who talks about going to Buckingham Palace, sitting on the throne of the Queen of England. So we've got the Andrew element, and then we've got our very own Lord Mandelson, who, of course, is now the ambassador over in America. He was a great pal of Epstein, wasn't he?
I mean, honestly, you don't see where these men's common interests would have lied. But I think Mandelson has handled this as well as he could have. He regrets the friendship. He wasn't quite aware of the extent of Epstein's misdeeds. And I think if the Trump administration were to take that kind of a line, it may be better off. Honestly, Alex, I don't see this getting Trump. But if you allow me a little bit of rope here, I think what will get Trump is not so much any association with Epstein. Again, these guys would have traveled in the same circles in the late 90s in New York. But Donald Trump's going to have a much more difficult time riding out the economy, and particularly inflation. Just before we came on air, I looked at the last inflation report. The things that people buy, like milk, like coffee, like fresh fruit, are rising by really high amounts month on month, between 2 and 3%. That's an amount that people will notice. And I think if that continues, people are going to be a lot crosser at Donald Trump for their grocery bills than they are for any association he may have had with Jeffrey Epstein. Remember, Donald Trump, one of his great campaign pledges, and one of the things I think people really liked about him, is they were tired of inflation under the Democrats. They thought Trump, as a businessman, might be able to solve that. I think this is something that this administration should worry more about than the Epstein stuff. I think the Epstein stuff, there needs to be a better response to it, but I don't think this should be as scary as they seem to be. They seem to be more threatened than I think they need to be.
I'll tell you what, Laurie, as much as I'm sympathetic with the grocery bills of America, I far prefer the Epstein files.
I know. As soon as I started talking about fresh milk, I knew I lost my audience.
Yeah, no, we want the dirt. We want the scandal. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for giving us the update. It's a story that ain't going to go anywhere quickly, that's for sure. Now, in terms of things that aren't going to go anywhere quickly, the French PM didn't he? Lost the confidence vote in the French Parliament, and essentially is being forced to resign. People are now calling for fresh parliamentary elections. Now, the last parliamentary elections happened around the same time as our own snap election. I remember them well. I was actually in France, and I remember Macron thought he was being ever so clever by forging this sort of grand coalition of the left in order to keep out Rassemblement National, keep out the far right. Well, that didn't last very long. It's all crumbled into a pile of rubbish, as it was always going to do, because they're fighting like cats in a sack. So what's going to happen next, and how bad is the situation in France? Because apparently they're going to need to go to the IMF PDQ. I don't know, they look at Britain and say, well, we don't want to become like them. I look at France and think, you're worse than us. Let's speak after the break to one of my favourite human beings on this planet. It's Ralph Schulhammer, who's a political theorist and professor at Webster University in Vienna. He's coming up after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. The French Prime Minister is to resign today. Au revoir and all of that. Well, France is in a bit of a mess. It's got its own migrant crisis. If you think we've got ghettoised cities, wait till you see what it's like over in France. Also, when it comes to the state of the economy, they're forward in the queue from us having to go to the IMF. Francois Bayrou, who entered office just 9 months ago, is now required to submit resignation of his minority government because he lost a vote yesterday, a confidence vote, by a huge 364 to 194. Let's speak now to one of my absolute favourites, Mr. Ralph Schulhammer, about what is going on the other side of Europe. Is it worse than us, Ralph?
Well, Alex, thank you so much for this high praise. I don't even know what to say. This is the highest form of intimidation.
Oh, Ralph, I can't hear you, love. Is that my earpiece or is that your audio?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there he is.
Oh, sorry.
You're there looking like a sort of Bond villain. I could see your sort of little head wobbling around, but couldn't hear the brilliant things you were saying.
I was just saying the nicest things about you, but I'll keep them for the after show. No, allow me to say, I have to defend the outgoing Prime Minister a little bit because he left office more or less saying France is on an unsustainable path, particularly when it comes to its finances. And either everybody agrees that we have to make reforms or we don't. And I think he took the high road. I mean, it was a mistake for him to call the no confidence vote. It was massively against him. It was over 300 votes against and only slightly over 100 for him. But I think he's leaving his office with his head held up high. However, which I think is more interesting for us, the big mistake was made by Emmanuel Macron. If Macron would have been smart during the last election, he would have told the right wing of Le Pen, listen, after the first round of the elections, I will support your candidates. We form a broad right-wing, center-right coalition, and then we bring France on the kind of reform course that is needed. But his own vanity and his own stupidity, I have to say, got in the way. Emmanuel Macron is, by the way, a great example for your viewers and listeners. A couple of years ago, he was on the cover of Time magazine and Newsweek as the man who will save Europe. By the way, the same newspapers who had Angela Merkel after Donald Trump's election on their cover saying the woman who leads the free world. So you can pretty much say with some certainty that whatever the mainstream media has on their cover is going to turn out to be entirely wrong just a couple of years later.
But Faz, another example of how leftism kills. Because you look at this and look at what Francois Bayrou said about France's economic situation, saying if we tax the rich to solve the debt crisis, there's going to be a huge economic meltdown, high taxes, the wealthy will flee, and we'll be like the UK. And you think the man's got a point, and I agree with you. I mean, what Macron did in those elections just over a year ago, in basically pulling together all of the mad left parties, some absolute stonking, crazy socialists and communists among them, to form this super coalition to lock out Rassemblement National, who, of course, the French bleat that they're far right, aren't they terrible? But I've read their manifesto. They just say sensible things like we want to control borders, for crying out loud. Why is there this grip of radical, extreme, destructive socialism that seems to have Europe in its stranglehold?
Well, I think at some point it has entered by now the European DNA. I cannot say it in any different way, but I would say the same is partially also true for the UK. I mean, let's be honest, if you cannot win an election in France with the sentence, we are becoming like the UK, is there anything you can do to win an election? I mean, I think it would work the other way around as well. If I would be a British politician, I guess saying, oh my God, we got to become like France is probably just, equally a valid threat to make to the British people. But overall, the issue has remained the same, which is people are willing to make sacrifices. People are willing to make sacrifices in Germany, in France. They would also be willing to make sacrifices in the UK. However, these sacrifices must be fairly and equally distributed. And you cannot ask in France, in the UK, the minimum income pensioner with, I don't know, maybe £700 a month to take cuts for the benefit of all and at the same time you house migrants at 4-star hotels. It's simply not fair, and it's the same in France. I looked at the numbers of foreign students. Most of the so-called foreign students in France come from the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. Like, these are not, I'm sorry to say, these are not the so-called skilled workers that we also have been told will come to Germany from Syria. And the French people say, wait a moment, you screw everything up, then you go in front of the cameras and say, we all have to stick together and make sacrifices for the better, for the betterment of France. And I think this is the big problem. People are willing to make sacrifices, but those who demand them have to go first, and they are unwilling to do so.
Yeah, I mean, the charge levelled against Macron is very similar to the charge often levelled against Keir Starmer, which is you love trying to swan around on the world stage and be the big I am. No one knows what on earth you're up to at home, and it seems to be going horribly wrong. How bad are things in France? I love France, but the last time I was there, just over a year ago, you can drive around the French countryside and basically it looks like there's been an apocalypse. You barely see anybody, shutters closed and all the rest of it. But when you go into the cities, I was astonished at some of the towns I visited. You have this palpable sense as you walk in through the sort of outer crust of a conurbation into the centre. You go through that sort of orbit of a ghetto, and it really is ghettoised. When you look at London, you think, wow, you know, the demographics have changed here. Parts of France, I mean, there's crazy things going on in places like Dijon, where they're having running gun battles, and the Islamism in France. I mean, how bad is it over there?
Oh, it is very bad. And by the way, it's not just you as an English woman and me as an Austrian saying this. It's the French themselves. It is no coincidence that one of the loudest voices regarding remigration is Renaud Camus, right, who is a Frenchman. It also is no coincidence, and what I would argue was one of the most prophetic books regarding mass migration, was published in the 1970s, was The Camp of the Saints by Jean Raspail. So the French, or at least some of the French intellectuals, have been knowing for 40 years, like Enoch Powell, by the way, in the UK, that the writing on the wall was already there. But we have in all areas, I would say, not just migration, but also, of course, the cultural areas, the economic areas, the retirement systems, and that's true for all over Europe. We simply were cruising towards the cliff and pretended that it's never going to come. And now it is coming closer and closer, ever faster. And I think the ruling elite, like the Macrons, the Starmers, the Friedrich Merzes, by the way, and I mean both the so-called center-left and the center-right in this, because at least the radical left, like the one in France, they're honest about the destructive instincts. Like, they're insane, and they carry their insanity like a badge of honor. I can respect that. They don't pretend to be something they are not. But with the Macrons, the Starmers, the Merzes, they pretend that they are something which they are not. They simply want to muddle through and hope that all of this is going to go away, but it's not going to go away. But a friend of mine once said the big problem these days is that good people cannot change anything because they are no longer willing to go to the lengths that are going to be necessary to turn this car around. And I think he's right. But the longer we go into the wrong direction, the more painful the return to normalcy will be.
No, I totally agree. So what do you think is going to happen next in France now? Because people are clamouring for another parliamentary election. I don't live in France, but actually I would sort of join that chorus, because I think the last ones were stitched up, and I think what they do need is to hold these elections, do it properly. None of this, let's try and block out Rassemblement, get more of that representation in Parliament. You might suddenly start having policies put in place that appease the people, that are popular, that take France in the right direction. But I can't see little Napoleon wanting to do that anytime soon. Calls as well for him to resign. I mean, in your dreams, he ain't going anywhere, is he?
Well, in the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, I think we're now at the denial stage. And this is what you see, again, not just in France, which is this idea that you simply must prevent the other side from ever coming to power. And this is, I agree with your assessment completely, but what's going to happen is Macron has an approval rating of around 15%. So he's a dead man walking, politically speaking. So it's not like the United States under Joe Biden, where they had a literal dead man walking. In the French case, it's only the pretend dead man walking. And what they're trying to do is, right, they will cling to power as much as they can, and thereby prevent anybody who could affect real change, to prevent them from coming into power. It's the same playbook we see probably with Reform in the UK, with Le Pen in France, with the AfD in Germany, with the Freedom Party in Austria, with Vox in Spain. I mean, this is the same pattern over and over and over again. And I always say, when we talk about the elite, I mean the status quo elite. They are willing to keep course, even though everybody can already see the iceberg. It's literally, it's not like like the Titanic.
What is going on there? Because I can't. To me, it's one of the greatest riddles of our time. How we seem to have a supranational political establishment across Europe who seem to be willfully careering our entire civilization to the cliff edge. I mean, are they just deluded? Are they mad? Were they brainwashed as students and then somehow find themselves into positions of authority? Is there something else going on? I cannot for the life of me understand when the vast majority of European citizens are there going, we don't want open borders, we don't want net zero. You know, that they're just going completely the opposite direction and seem to be either blind to the destruction that they're creating or will for it to happen. I am so confused by this, Ralph.
Well, I mean, I'm myself not a particular religious person, but I would make an almost religious argument. In the post-World War II era, to a large extent, we have replaced God with the state. And the state representatives, in many cases, they believe that they, not directly, but they have like a godlike function. And what I mean by this is that they think that they are infallible. I mean, I give you a quick example. There was this hearing in the US Congress where I forgot what the name of the senator was, who was saying he's very concerned by the idea that rights come from God and not from the state, even though it directly says, I think, in the US Declaration of Independence, right, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that everybody's endowed by their creators. And I mean this not as a religious argument, but there was always the idea that there is a moral dimension, a dimension of duty and responsibility that, for example, I think Queen Elizabeth II understood very well, that is outside of day-to-day politics. But this is something that the Stammers, the Merzes, and all these other politicians we talk about do not understand. They think that they are on top and thereby, like, they can do no wrong. I think this is truly what they believe. I mean, Angela Merkel, by the way, is the best example. If you read, I did it for you so that you don't have to. If you read her biography, or if you look at the interviews that she's now giving, like there's not even a shred of admittance that maybe we could have done things differently. Maybe we made some mistake. Not at all. She's doubling down on everything she did because she's also part of this self-declared, quote unquote, supposed meritocratic elite that simply thinks that because they were in these high positions of power that they can do no wrong.
Oh, it's like the last days of Rome, Ralph. Thank you so much for coming on the
Alex.
programme.
Thank you.
I love you, Ralph. You're the best. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but as promised, we are going to be joined after this break by the utterly exceptional Andrew Gold, who's a former BBC presenter and host of what I think is probably one of the best podcasts in all of the United Kingdom. It's called Heretics. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. I've been on it twice, you know. Lucky me. No, it's really good. He's like some sort of, he's like a do-over and an improvement of Louis Theroux, and then some. Anyway, if you don't know Andrew Gold, you've got a treat in store, I'll tell you that much, so stay tuned because he's coming up after this.
you think there's an easier and a swifter solution?
Yeah, there is. The easier and swifter solution is the second that boot steps onto the British sand, they need to be arrested, they need to be detained, and then they need to be deported. And if you have videos of that going all over social media, instead of videos of people being put onto a coach, sent off to a hotel, getting 3 square meals a day, plus freedom to go into the local town and do what they want, plus pocket money and all these extra perks that even the British people don't get.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Well, the BBC Director General has been dragged in front of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport Committee, being grilled over some of the BBC's failings in recent times. Shall we have a little clip at when he was asked about some of the scandal that's come out from the talent at the BBC, people like Greg Wallace, and what response he gave to the committee?
Are you able to assure us today, are you able to give us your categorical assurance that whenever we next have you in front of us, there won't be a scandal of BBC talent abusing their position, which you need to apologise for?
We are seeing people call it out, and that is a positive change, but it's ongoing work. I don't think you can change culture in 6 months and suddenly say nothing's going to occur. We may see more things coming out because in some ways I'm asking for it and being utterly transparent and running towards the problem. That's what we need to do.
Well, I am joined now by a brilliant man indeed. He used to work at the BBC before he suddenly realised there are a load of leftist nut jobs and set up on his own to create one of the greatest podcasts in the United Kingdom. In fact, the greatest podcast. I've been on it twice. It's called Heretics. Andrew, it's brilliant. You have the best guests and you do proper journalism, and you're just an incredible man, and I adore you, as you well know. Now, what do you make of all of this? I mean, when it comes to the BBC and the talent and the scandal surrounding them, there have been problems in the past. We know that. Do you think there is more to come out?
I think, yeah, there was amazing. I mean, that Telegraph article, that was like a year ago that showed the BBC had made something like 1,500 errors in favour of Palestine. Every single time it's in, or anti-Israel, anti-Semitic in some cases. I hate going for that word because you don't know. I just think we're in a bit of a situation now where the BBC has all kinds of regulations that a lot of us YouTubers don't. I don't know how exactly it works at Talk, for example, and GB News, but I know that the BBC, it is like the red tape is crazy. And whenever you get any kind of culture that has that much red tape, as well-meaning as it is, it tends to lean towards gradually this kind of groupthink authoritarian situation. You can't ever question something like trans, for example. That was why that was so difficult for them to question, because everyone's just worried about losing their job. They're worried about the person above them in the ranking. So it's a lovely idea, the BBC, but in today's world, I just don't think it can work. And I think, yeah, it's going to get worse and worse over the coming years. We're going to see.
I mean, what was astonishing, considering, I agree with you, somebody worked for the BBC, albeit not for a massively long time, exactly what you're describing, this bureaucratic behemoth stuffed to the gills with a load of Guardian readers, is the dystopian reality of Auntie. And as you said there, I remember sitting in a news meeting once and they were talking about immigration, and I saying, oh, we should go and speak to a school teacher who's got kids who speak different languages. You'd have thought I said, oh, let's go and chop the heads off those kids. You know, the looks of horror, like, oh, the immigration could be a challenge. And this was going back years ago, and I hated the BBC so much I went to work for UKIP, and Nigel Farage just left it and went, I've got to sort this out, and I think that man's going to do it. But when you look at the sort of the crazy decision to continue streaming Bob Villan at Glastonbury when he's shouting death to the IDF and stuff like that, and no one said, oh, do you know what, we should probably pull the plug on this is getting a bit much. I mean, what? How on earth? Because it wasn't Davy at Glastonbury at the time. A load of them had all gone down to wear their lanyards and their wellies and be the big I-ams. Did none of those people think, ooh, maybe this shouldn't be being put out live at 3 p.m. in the afternoon?
Yeah, well, look, there's a lot of
this is a really complex thing, and I've said to you off air before, I don't like the idea of censoring or stopping him. I want the world to see what this horrible man has said. I don't want that to be cancelled. I don't really know how the BBC should have handled that. A lot of people think they should have just cut the broadcast at that point. Now, I'm a Jew. I just was sort of born that way, and I know that when you start taking people off the air because of things they're saying about Jews, it doesn't end well. People start to say, oh, look who is in charge of the world, look who you can't speak about. Those kinds of things start to swill around. So I think we're in a very difficult position right now. One question I would have is why festivals have continued to hire him in the first place, and maybe that's something that the BBC needed to be more aware of before the recording. This man is a very difficult, complex man. We're talking about Pascal Robinson Foster, a far posher name than the impression he might want to give off. And there are videos circulating which have now been promptly taken down of him speaking with a far posher accent as well. So it appears that everything about this man is phony and false and part of the act. And I have friends who are very much in that festival world, some of them being festival owners, who have told me that he is one of the worst people in the business to work with. There are all sorts of things around the internet. So we're not just talking about his views about Israel. This is something that hasn't been reported. The mainstream haven't seemed to have gotten hold of this, or no one seems to have gotten hold of this. This is a man who's been involved in a fracas after fracas and had to be cut from all sorts of things. So should he have been there in the first place? Is the whole thing about him being this kind of woke freedom fighter utterly false? I think we can imagine it is. And yeah, I mean, this whole death to stuff, I mean, that has become increasingly common in our culture wars today. We're hearing death to, often from the left. And that is something that you almost exclusively over the decades have heard from Islamism. There aren't many others who, I mean, there might be some freak examples, I'm sure someone will find online, but death to America, death to the IDF. This is a very, very Islamist way of speaking and chanting. So I think I'm more than being concerned with the BBC. I know that's what the main talking point is here right now. I think the BBC is just gone. I don't even know where to start with it. I'm happy they didn't stop that. We wouldn't be talking about it then. We wouldn't know what he was saying. But this is a very scary kind of Islamo-leftist thing that is taking over the entire left, and he is at the front of it.
And yet people there's this tendency among the left to sort of normalise Hamas's freedom fighters. It still goes on today, and taking it back to the BBC, again, they made that documentary, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. I bet the commissioner said, this is going to be brilliant. We're going to have footage from inside Gaza. It's going to be a little kid narrating it. Again, I think there's this sickness now in society of holding up children as oracles and narrators. I'm really not for it. But it turns out, of course, that the kid used was the son of someone in Hamas. And basically what Davey has said is, look, the people who made the documentary are facing consequences. They did it. We commissioned it. Hoyo Films, I think it is, are the ones who are going to have to take the rap from it. But the chairman, Samir Shada, said it was a mistake what the report found, that there were not open and transparent conversations about the relationship of the narrator to a Hamas official. But again, I think it's because, like you said, there's this sort of capture of people, whether it be in sort of a lot of the documentary making companies or the BBC, who have just swallowed hook, line and sinker this sort of mad radical leftist attitude.
Yeah. I suppose it's quite fun because you get to hate, and then you get to hate in a way that everybody says you're a great person. There was that excellent John Cleese bit he did about 20, 30, 40 years ago. I don't know when this was. You can find it on social media, where he talks about, if you're on the left, you can hate this person, that person, and be angry and aggressive and scream and say all the horrible things and act in a horrible way and still be the good guy, still feel like a good guy. So that is very tempting. It's been tempting to everyone from, Soviet Russia to the Stasi. It's a great feeling. You get to feel like you're the people fighting for good. You're on the progressive side, and it will always take over, as you said earlier. These kind of bureaucratic corporations like the BBC. The issue is, time and time again, the BBC have had to put out these apologies. Oh, sorry, we didn't realise it was the son of Hamas. We didn't realise this, we didn't realise that. But it's these little apologies that the vast majority of people who are too busy feeling good about themselves on the left will never see. And if they do see, they'll just go,